Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sandra Gallas. Sandra was born on May 15, 1978 in Japan. Her background was a mix of half Japanese, a quarter Hawaiian, and a quarter Portuguese. Sandra had an older brother, Lawrence, who always looked out for her. After Larry retired early from the military, her parents, Larry and Tashi, decided to move to Hawaii. Turns out, Hawaii is Larry's hometown. They settled on the island of Kauai, fulfilling their long-held dream of living in Hawaii. They instantly fell in love with the stunning island and found the locals to be extremely kind and welcoming. By the age of 4, Sandra was practicing gymnastics, and by 5, she was learning the traditional Hawaiian hula dance. She studied very well and became a very beautiful girl. Sociable, cheerful, and active, she made many friends. After graduating from high school, Sandra attended New York University to study journalism. Although she dreamed of becoming a journalist, her life took a different path. As someone from an island, she found New York City overwhelming, with its towering, makes her feel suffocated. She didn't enjoy living there and visited her parents in Hawaii, missing them greatly. After graduating, Sandra returned to Hawaii, where she met Darren Gallas, who was working as a builder at the time. Darren was captivated by Sandra's beauty, and they began dating in 1999. With her parents' blessing, they got married, and Sandra took his last name. They bought their own house, on the island of Kauai. They appeared to be a happy, loving family. Sandra and Darren had 2 sons. A year after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, Austin. 2 years later, their youngest son, Braden, was born. Sandra took care of the children and managed the household. She and Darren love their sons very much and always try to do the best for them. However, their relationship gradually deteriorated. In 2005, Sandra discovers Darren has been having affairs with 2 married women. She found their phone numbers among his belongings. After she called them, they confessed to having affairs with Darren. She decided to end the marriage and filed for divorce. She could not bear his infidelity any longer. In June 2005, Darren moved out of the family home, while Sandra and their children remained there. Sandra changes her hairstyle to enter a new phase of life. Sandra started working as a waitress at a restaurant on the island to support herself and her children. Her goal was to become financially independent and no longer rely on Darren. Sandra's kind, polite, and friendly nature made her a favorite among the restaurant's guests and staff. It was there that she met Ryan Shinjo, a chef. He was calm, polite, and courteous, the exact opposite of Darren. As they spent more time together, a romance blossomed. Sandra felt comfortable and at ease with him, something she hadn't had in a long time. Ryan made her happy, and their relationship grew deeper and deeper. On weekends, they would often take trips to Honolulu. And Ryan would shower her with gifts. Sandra's parents were overjoyed to see their daughter happy again after a difficult divorce. Sandra and Ryan had plans to move in together, but unfortunately, those plans were not meant to be. Soon, tragedy struck. On January 25, 2006, 27-year-old Sandra was brutally murdered. That morning, before going to work, Ryan visited her. But when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. This was unusual, because they had agreed that he would stop by to visit her before going to work. He began checking the area around the house to understand what was going on and found that the garage door was closed and the lights were still on, meaning someone must be inside. He thought it was Sandra and that she simply hadn't heard the knocking at the door. Ryan looked out the garage window, and he saw a strange sight inside. Inside the car, Sandra was half lying down and unresponsive. Concerned that she might be suffocating from exhaust fumes, he screamed and called her name. but she did not answer. Panicked, he rushed to a neighbor's house, about half a kilometer away, for help. Together, they managed to open the garage door. Upon entering, he touched Sandra. He found her body was already cold. Immediately, he called 911 to report that Sandra was not showing any signs of life. Sandra, 27, was pronounced dead by paramedics. Police began examining her body, which was found inside the car. She was partially lying down, with her lower body in the driver's seat and her upper body thrown back onto the front passenger seat. It was clear that Sandra had been dead for some time and had been attacked. Her body showed signs of beating and had lacerations on his neck, indicating that she had been murdered. Forensic experts searched the crime scene for evidence, but found none. There were no CCTV cameras or witnesses in the area. Police suspected that Sandra had been trying to escape from someone, as it appeared she had been in a hurry to leave. She had been getting ready quickly, got into the car, but didn't have time to drive away. Instead, she was attacked, knocked down, and strangled. Investigators found no signs of robbery in the house. Valuables were still in their places, and there was no sign of disarray. Sandra was not raped, so what could have been the motive for the murder? Meanwhile, Sandra's parents were visiting their son in Texas and never imagined that something like this would happen to their daughter. In the morning, Sandra's boss called her because she hadn't shown up to work. This worried them, as Sandra was always known to be hardworking and responsible. When her parents tried calling her, she didn't answer. By evening, they received the devastating news about their daughter's murder and rushed back home. The brutal killing shocked everyone on the island. The locals were scared and worried that a serial killer might be on the loose on the island, posing a threat to them. People asked the police to explain, but the authorities reassured the people. They believed it was a crime with a personal motive, meaning it was intentional and targeted. Hawaii generally has a very low crime rate compared to the national average, except for certain disadvantaged areas on the island of Oahu. Detectives were committed to solving the case quickly to reassure the island's residents. Investigators believe the brutal nature of the death suggests a personal motive, so they considered ex-husband and current lovers as suspects. Ryan, the current lover, discovered Sandra's body. Darren, her ex-husband, had a strained relationship with her, and their divorce was nearing finalization. Darren is very sad about their divorce, and he became enraged upon learning about her affair with Ryan. Additionally, Darren and she was embroiled in a heated custody battle, which caused constant conflict. As a result, investigators questioned both suspects, Darren and Ryan, at the scene. First, they interrogated Darren. He stated that the day before the incident, he had picked up the children according to the court-ordered schedule. He took them to kindergarten in the morning, painted his mother's room while they were away, and then picked them up, spending a pleasant time with them. Darren claimed that when Sandra was supposed to pick up the children in the afternoon after work, but instead, the police came to him with bad news about her death. Darren claimed he was not involved in Sandra's death. Even though they are divorced, they still maintain a peaceful relationship and keep in touch for the sake of their children. Initially, he spoke confidently, but his actions showed the opposite. In the middle of the interrogation, he became nervous, confused his statements, and raised the police's suspicions. He could not provide verifiable alibis. At the time of the tragic incident, their children were too young to give statements, being only 3 and 5 years old. According to Darren, he was home alone at the time. But he failed the polygraph test. Turns out, he never called Sandra to check why did she come home late, which was unusual, leading investigators to suspect him of Sandra's murder. A search warrant for his home has been issued. The police discovered that a room remained unpainted, contradicting his claims. This suggested he might have had the opportunity to go to Sandra and kill her. After thoroughly inspecting the house, investigators found nothing relevant to the case. Despite their suspicions, the detective had to let Darren go home. They interviewed people close to he and Sandra, including her parents. All suspected him of having something to do with her death. He was known to be extremely jealous and controlling. He did not want to leave her and opposed the divorce until the last minute. Sandra had no enemies. Her family and relatives believe that Darren is the only person who could be her killer. Sandra's new lover, Ryan, provided an alibi. Although he failed a polygraph test, he was removed from the list of suspects. An autopsy revealed that Sandra died from strangulation, with characteristic marks on her neck and hemorrhages in her eyes. Her body also showed multiple injuries, indicating a painful death. Detectives were convinced that Darren was directly involved in her death, but they lacked the evidence to prove it. 2 years later, Sandra's undershirt was re-examined. During this detailed investigation, DNA was found and sent for analysis. The results revealed that Darren's DNA was present on her undershirt. This led authorities to consider charging him with murder, as it was considered vital evidence. However, the prosecutor decided against pursuing charges due to insufficient evidence. Before the murder, they were in regular contact and saw each other, especially when he came to pick up the children. Therefore, it is possible that his DNA accidentally got on her clothes without being related to the murder. The children, Austin and Braden, lived with their father, Darren. He had been granted full custody. The loss of their mother, Sandra, at such a young age was a significant shock for them. Austin and Braden's maternal grandparents have requested custody of the 2 children, citing Darren's aggressive behavior and his endangerment of the children. They believed he was responsible for Sandra's death and accused him of alienating the children from their grandparents. Despite these accusations, the court awarded full custody to Darren. He later married his new girlfriend, Kyron, and moved on with his life. As time passed, the investigation made no progress. Sandra's parents maintained regular contact with investigators, determined to seek justice for their daughter. From the moment he learned of Sandra's murder, her father vowed to continue to find the culprit so that he could be punished by the law. Thanks to the persistence of Sandra's parents and their close cooperation with the police, the case was eventually solved. The family offered a $20,000 reward to anyone providing information leading to the arrest and conviction of their daughter's killer, but still no one spoke up. It was not until 2012 that a team of investigators was assigned to look into the case. They reviewed all the materials with a fresh perspective and discovered some other details. In the documents, they found letters from Sandra to the attorney handling her divorce. These letters showed that her relationship with Darren was very strained. The letters revealed that she was afraid of his aggressive behavior. He had threatened her, was unhappy about her new relationship, and had harassed her. The most important evidence is the sign that Darren is a fussy person. Sandra mentioned that he was so meticulous and organized in everything he did, to the point that he wrote down in his diary every time she was upset about something, no matter how minor. This information intrigued the police, causing them to return to Darren's house to find and examine the diary. When they found out, they were shocked because he had kept detailed notes of every complaint about Sandra. He recorded every day of their life. For instance, he noted when she was 5 minutes late for a meet or bought the wrong kind of bread. However, there were no entries on the day before the murder, which puzzled the police because they knew he and Sandra had met, making it hard to believe that such a picky person would have no complaints to record. Sandra did not pick up the children on the day she died. Why didn't Darren note this in his diary or try to contact her? Perhaps he already knew she was dead and wouldn't be coming. Darren said he did not remember clearly what happened that day, which is why there is no diary entry for that day, even though he recalls other details clearly. His behavior seemed odd and unbelievable. Researchers speculated that he killed Sandra because he didn't want a divorce. In October 2012, Darren was charged with second-degree murder, with bail set at $1 million. He managed to post bail, allowing him to stay home during the trial preparation. Darren maintained his innocence. His lawyer pointed out that there was no evidence against him except DNA on the clothes, which might have ended up there for legitimate reasons, as he often picked up the children. All other evidence was circumstantial. Despite disagreements with Sandra, but they had reached an agreement on the division of property and shared custody. Therefore, the defense argued Darren had no motive to kill her. Additionally, Darren's attorney asked investigators to turn their attention to Ryan Shinju, who was romantically involved with Sandra at the time of her death. Ryan had a criminal history related to burying illegal substances. However, he denied all accusations against him, citing an alibi for the time of Sandra's death. He also cooperated fully with the investigation. He attributed his past criminal record to youthful mistakes and emphasized that he has not committed any offenses since then and has shown no inclination toward violence. Sandra's relatives and friends, called as witnesses for the prosecution, supported Ryan's statements. They described him as a kind person who Sandra felt very comfortable around. None of them believed Ryan could commit murder, especially since he had no motive. However, they had a different opinion about Darren. Darren was a cruel and domineering. He was someone Sandra feared. She avoided seeing him to avoid angering him. By court order, Sandra was forced to give Darren the opportunity to communicate with the children, even though she did not want to. Ryan added that he and Sandra planned to move in together for her protection against Darren. He suspects Darren is the person behind the crime, although there is no direct evidence. During the trial, Darren was portrayed poorly and was likely to be convicted. On his lawyer's advice, Darren accepted a plea bargain from the prosecution to reduce his sentence. This decision disappointed Sandra's family, but the prosecutor argued that a plea deal was the better option because without enough evidence, Darren could be acquitted. The prosecutor estimated a 50% chance of conviction, so Sandra's family agreed to the plea deal. In May 2018, 12 years after Sandra's murder, Darren pleaded guilty to first-degree assault on his wife, causing serious bodily harm. He did not provide any details about the crime. He was sentenced to imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 85% of his sentence. In March 2022, his minimum term was reduced by 6 months. He may be eligible for parole in 8 years, with the earliest release date being May 2, 2026, and the latest May 1, 2028. He is currently serving his sentence in prison. Sandra's parents are still upset by the sentence, considering it unfair that Darren received only 8 to 10 years for a brutal murder. They believe he acted in a calculated, planning everything meticulously. He allegedly cleaned the crime scene thoroughly, wore gloves, and hid all evidence. He also provided a false, claiming he was painting walls, which was later proven untrue. Now that Sandra's parents are over 80, they live a peaceful and steady life. Her father had several heart attacks due to severe stress after losing his daughter. His biggest wish was to see Darren put in jail. Their son, Lawrence, often visits them from Texas. Sandra's parents hope Darren will one day feel remorse for his actions. Sandra lived a respectable life. Her children are now adults, living independently, no contact with maternal family, so little is known about them. Sandra's parents think Darren is the one who turned her children against her and her maternal family. During the trial, Sandra's children, then adults, sided with Darren and his parents. They do not believe that their father killed their mother. They attended all the hearings and, after Darren was convicted, cut ties with their mother's family. They believe that their mother's family put their father in prison. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Reagan Hancock. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Reagan's mother went to visit her pregnant daughter and discovered her body lying on the floor. Reagan, then 22 years old, had been brutally beaten and stabbed to death. Her unborn child had been removed from her womb and kidnapped. Born on November 14, 1998, in Howe, Arkansas, Reagan was part of a large Christian family that included a younger sister and several half-siblings. Reagan also had a 3-year-old daughter, Kinley, from a previous relationship. Unfortunately, Kinley's father had passed away. She had recently remarried to Homer Hancock and the couple had just moved into a new home. Reagan and her husband were eagerly preparing for the birth of their child, due November 10, 2020. They had purchased all the necessary supplies and her parents had chosen the name for their child, Braxton Sage. Reagan and Homer worked hard to support their family. Despite swelling in her feet, Reagan continued to work at a fast food restaurant. She had plans to attend college, but postponed it due to her first pregnancy. Her husband Homer worked in the freight industry. On October 9, 2020, at 8:30 a.m., Homer started receiving unusual messages from her. Reagan expressed that she wanted to be happy, but things weren't going well. Homer was confused and worried about what was happening. He replied to her messages, told her he loved her, and tried to call, but she didn't answer. At 9:30 a.m., a neighbor texted Homer and said their puppy was outside. The neighbor came to their house and found the garage door open, which was strange since no one was home. Worried, Homer tried to contact Reagan again but got no response. He called everyone he could think of, but no one had any information. Finally, he called Reagan's mother and asked her to check on Reagan. Since he was away from home, he took the day off from work and rushed back. Reagan's mother arrived at the house at 10:15 a.m. and found a horrifying scene. It was her worst nightmare, and she immediately called the police. When Homer arrived, officers were already at the scene and wouldn't let him enter. The officers were stunned by what they saw. Blood covered the floors, walls, ceiling, and furniture. Reagan was found lying face down, severely beaten with multiple defensive wounds on her arms, showing that she had fought back. It was clear that her death was extremely cruel. Concerned for the baby she was carrying, Reagan's mother asked the police to check. When they turned Reagan over, they discovered a large cut in her abdomen, and the baby was missing. Police believed the attacker primarily targeted the baby. Reagan's 3-year-old daughter, Kinley, was safe and hiding in another room during the incident. Forensic scientists quickly arrived to investigate the crime scene. Around 10 a.m., police pulled over a car for speeding. Taylor Renee Parker was driving with a newborn baby on her lap, and the umbilical cord had not been cut. The other end of the cord was tucked into her pants. She stated that she had just given birth while driving and that her baby was not breathing and needed urgent help. The police found it strange that there was no blood on the seat. They called for an ambulance and began performing artificial respiration on the baby. An ambulance arrived and took Taylor and the baby to the hospital, but hours later, the baby was dead. Doctors began examining Taylor, but she resisted. During the examination, they discovered that she was not bleeding. A hormone blood test showed that she was not pregnant. The baby was small and premature, born at 35 weeks. Taylor initially said that she was pregnant with the baby. She staged the scene with the umbilical cord to make the police believe that the baby was hers. The police later discovered that the baby was not hers. They returned to the hospital and arrested Taylor. Taylor, a 27-year-old friend of Reagan, was excited when Reagan announced her second pregnancy on social media. Later, Reagan reached out to Taylor, who was also expecting, and they formed a friendship. The two girls lived close to each other. Taylor resided in the nearby town of Sims, Texas, about 15 kilometers from Reagan's home in New Boston. They frequently communicated online and occasionally met for walks. They had much in common, both preparing for childbirth, shopping for baby items, attending prenatal classes, and sharing their experiences. Taylor's relationships have been complicated. She has a daughter and a son from 2 previous marriages, both of whom live with their fathers and are already in school. Taylor lost custody of them and has had very little contact since then. Taylor formed a close bond with Reagan, even filming their wedding, but during this time, she was misleading both Reagan and her fiancé, Wade Griffin. At the start of her relationship with Wade, she lied about being an heiress to a multi-million-dollar fortune, claiming her family were oil tycoons. Later, she told him she had ties to the Mexican mafia and needed his protection, asserting that her presence caused a major shootout involving the FBI, which she insisted must remain secret from the media. Wade believed her and became involved in expanding his farming business at her urging, which led him to buy more pigs and cows. He took out a loan for these purchases, thinking he would repay it with the inheritance Taylor promised him. However, he never received any money and ended up in a tough financial situation. Later, Taylor became obsessed with the idea of buying a large hunting property valued at nearly $5 million, even though she didn't have the funds. She spoke to a realtor, claiming to be the heiress of a multi-million-dollar fortune from syrup producers, despite having previously said her family was involved in the oil industry. They reached an agreement to buy a plot of land for $3.5 million, making an initial deposit of $200,000 that Taylor borrowed from Wade. At that moment, Taylor felt proud and shared the exciting news with her family, giving everyone postcards featuring a photo of the property and saying they could go hunting there. However, the deal ultimately fell through, because she could not afford to pay the remaining amount. Initially, Taylor claimed that the syrup company would pay $7 million, but that money never arrived. At that time, Taylor was intensely motivated to purchase her dream home, which cost $20 million, a sum she didn't have. She falsely claimed that a wealthy uncle could provide the money, but then she vanished again. Concerned, the realtor attempted to contact both Taylor and Wade, unaware of the ongoing deception. Taylor eventually presented the realtor with documents claiming she had inherited $370 million, but these documents were fake. As a result of her lies, her relationship with Wade was on the brink of collapse. Feeling that she might lose Wade, Taylor decided to have a child to strengthen their bond, but she faced challenges getting pregnant due to her hysterectomy. Thus, she devised a scheme for a fake pregnancy. In February 2020, she told Wade they were expecting a baby in July. Taylor shared an ultrasound photo on social media, but it was actually an image of her other daughter. There are some people who know the whole story about Taylor and know that she cannot conceive. They discussed this in a conversation and are confused about why she would fake her pregnancy, believing it to be a tactic to keep her husband. However, they do not know her true intentions. Additionally, Taylor's family knows that she cannot conceive and suspects that she fabricated this pregnancy to keep Wade with her. They believe this is a hoax on her part. Recognizing her behavior, her relatives suspected that Taylor's false pregnancy would soon result in a miscarriage, and that would be the end of it. However, they never imagined she would go to the lengths of committing murder to obtain a child. While pretending to be pregnant, Taylor continued to seek approval from Wade's family, who were not fond of her. Knowing that Wade's mother had a crush on a Nissan Altima Platinum, Taylor bought one for her, much to her delight. Unfortunately, Taylor later claimed that the car had been repossessed by the dealership. Wade and his mother were hopeful for its return, but that never happened. Wade then contacted the dealership to inquire about the new car, only to learn that it had not been recalled. Rather, it had been sent back to the showroom because they hadn't paid for it. This revelation shocked Wade, but he chose to remain silent because he did not want Taylor to be stressed during her pregnancy. Taylor attempted to persuade her friends and family that she was pregnant. She shared ultrasound images and test results, claiming that her pregnancy was a blessing from God. Before the pregnancy, Taylor had told Wade and his family that her mother had committed to end his own life, likely to gain sympathy. However, everyone was shocked when Taylor's mother appeared at the Christmas party, as they believed she was dead. In mid-September 2020, just a couple of weeks before the due date, Taylor's ex-husband contacted Wade and claimed that she couldn't have children and was lying to him. Taylor then showed ultrasound pictures from a previous pregnancy and provided fake test results. She reassured Wade that her ex was trying to ruin her life and their happiness. Taylor promised Wade that she would soon give birth, proving that her pregnancy was real and that she wasn't lying. As October began, Wade asked about the baby's condition. She replied that the baby would come when the time was right. Meanwhile, Wade's mother expressed doubts about Taylor's pregnancy, insisting that Taylor was cheating on him. This caused Wade to distance himself from his mother because she did not trust him. Early on the morning of October 9th, Taylor felt it was time to act. She stopped at Walmart to shop, then grabbed breakfast at McDonald's while watching a video about a 35-week cesarean, which was the stage her friend Reagan was in. Taylor texted Reagan at 7 a.m., saying she was coming to visit. Taylor had made friends with several pregnant women online. She developed a sense of trust with them and eventually decided that Reagan would be the easiest target to kill. Reagan was the kindest and most trusting of the group, making her an ideal victim. Taylor was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and the murder of a child. However, she denied having planned the crime. Taylor claimed that when she visited Reagan, Reagan attacked her, and she used a knife in self-defense. Why didn't Taylor have any injuries after such an intense fight? She couldn't explain it, but she did share how the child ended up in her care. According to Taylor, Reagan was so injured that she felt the baby was dying inside her. Reagan begged Taylor to help, asking her to deliver the baby and take it to the hospital to save its life. Taylor was reluctant at first, but Reagan pleaded with her. At Reagan's insistence, Taylor attempted to save the baby. Taylor happened to have a scalpel and used it to cut into Reagan's abdomen to remove the baby and take the baby to the hospital. However, if this was the case, why did Taylor lie to the police who pulled her over, claiming that she had given birth? Taylor also later mentioned that Reagan's daughter, Kinley, left the room because of the screaming while Taylor was in surgery, and the girl testified to everything. This incident resulted in psychological trauma for Kinley. Additionally, Reagan's phone was never found. It seems Taylor turned off the phone and threw it away. When questioned, Wade said that he was not allowed to touch Taylor's stomach and not allowed to sleep with her to protect the baby, and that he believed her without question. Police believed Wade's story and he did not face any criminal charges. Taylor was transferred from Oklahoma to a prison in Texas, and her trial began in September 2022. Attorneys attempted to dismiss the kidnapping charges, arguing that the baby was not yet full term, but the judge rejected their arguments. The defense did not present any witnesses. Not even Taylor's mother or relatives were willing to testify on her behalf. During the trial, Taylor's ex-husband provided testimony. He said that Taylor constantly simulated seizures and health problems to arouse his pity. When he decided to end their relationship, Taylor suggested they have a child, even though she was unable to conceive again. She proposed using a surrogate mother, funded by her wealthy relatives, but he turned her down. After their divorce, a hurt Taylor spoke negatively about he to her friends, alleging that they had still planned for a surrogate mother together, but claimed that he had cheated on her with the surrogate, which made it impossible for her to forgive him. While her lawyers claimed she was insane, a psychiatric evaluation confirmed that although she had mental health issues, she was sane. In prison, Taylor exhibited aggressive behavior. Police discovered a map of the prison in her cell, indicating she was planning an escape because she was facing the death penalty. During her final hearing, her defense attorneys argued that Taylor was trapped in a desperate situation due to her fake pregnancy. Everyone, including her mother, knew the pregnancy was wrong, but no one offered to help her, which led her to take drastic action. Taylor had planned the murders for a long time and specifically targeted pregnant women she met online. She eventually chose Reagan as her victim. Reagan's mother described Taylor as a vicious person and called for the death penalty for her daughter's brutal murder. During the attack, Reagan fought desperately for her life and that of her child. She almost lost a finger in defending herself. Because she was pregnant, Reagan was especially vulnerable and unable to fight back. She suffered over 100 wounds to her body, including 39 to the head. The prosecutor concluded his argument by once again showing haunting crime scene photos. The prosecutor argued that Taylor deserved the death penalty for his horrific crimes. Throughout the trial, Taylor remained emotionless, showing no remorse even during the trial. On November 11, 2022, the jury deliberated for only 1 hour before finding Taylor Renee Parker guilty and sentencing her to death. Following the trial, the community came together to support the Reagan family, organizing a fundraiser for Homer and her 3-year-old daughter, Kinley. They also raised funds by selling T-shirts. Homer has been raising Kinley as his own since the tragedy and only returned to the house once after Reagan's murder to collect some belongings before moving out with her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Victoria Rickman. At 2:30 a.m. on Friday, September 13, 2013, Victoria Rickman, 30, called 911 from her home on Cliffland Road in DeKalb County, Georgia. She reported a violent incident involving her fiancé, William Carter. She told the operator that he had tried to rape her again, and despite her pleas for him to stop, he didn't, so she shot him multiple times. When the police arrived, they found Victoria at the door, holding a small dog. Inside the bedroom was a scene of chaos and violence. The lifeless, naked body of a man was on the bed, riddled with bullets, and blood was splattered throughout the room, with bullet holes marking the walls and ceiling. A .40 caliber pistol was found on the nightstand. The victim, 30 years old William Carter, was declared dead at the scene. Victoria, in a state of hysteria, required medical assistance. After examining the scene, the police initially concluded that it was a case of self-defense, as Victoria claimed William had attacked her, forcing her to shoot randomly in defense. She was taken to the police station to provide a statement. However, as the investigation progressed, new details came to light. Victoria Rickman's first marriage ended in a divorce, with both parties accusing each other of abuse. During the marriage, she had a son whom she adored. At the time of the divorce, he was 8 years old. Victoria's friends described her as a devoted mother and a kind person who was always willing to help others. A few years after the divorce, Victoria met William Carter, through work colleagues. William was a successful businessman and is a divorced man. At that time, Victoria worked as a marketing consultant. They often encountered each other at work and soon began a passionate romance. They were inseparable, doing everything together and appearing to be the perfect couple. However, over time, the relationship developed issues similar to those Victoria had experienced in her first marriage. After they got engaged and moved in together, Victoria discovered that things were not as perfect as she had hoped. William became possessive, insulted her, and was physically abusive. She repeatedly forgave him and they continued living together. It was a vicious cycle of a toxic relationship that she couldn't escape. Victoria's friends advised her to leave William, they warning that things would end badly if she stayed. Victoria said she endured psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, and she felt she had no ability to change her situation. She continued to endure and forgive his behavior. However, just before the tragedy, she found the strength to leave he. Then he began to harass her relentlessly. According to Victoria, that night, he broke into her house and attacked her, escalating their conflicts to a peak. He threatened to rape her, and although she resisted, but she couldn't overpower him due to his physical strength. For the first time, Victoria feared for her life, convinced that the night would end in death. Either hers or his. So, she defended herself by grabbing a gun and shooting him multiple times. Victoria's best friend fully supported her and was sure that she was in grave danger that night, otherwise, she would not have used a weapon. The friend knew there were family issues but did not think it could all end like this. The detectives decided to speak with William's family to hear their version and get a more complete picture of the relationship between Victoria and William. William's parents, who had just learned of what happened to their son, immediately denied that it was self-defense. They gave a completely different story about Victoria. The parents said they had warned their son about the dangers of such a toxic relationship. They disliked Victoria from the start because of her unpleasant personality, and they saw her as a threat to be avoided. A few weeks before the tragedy, another disturbing incident occurred during an argument between William and Victoria. His parents noticed he was bleeding and injured. He explained that Victoria had hit him on the head with a hammer and bit his back. His parents were shocked because the blow was severe and could have been fatal. They dreaded to think what might have happened if she had had a gun. Then William and Victoria separated again, and his parents hope they won't come back. He didn't press charges against she because she threatened to accuse him of rape. William's family said they often argued and these conflicts often progressed into fights. Sometimes Victoria attacked William, and sometimes he attacked her. During their 3 years their relationship was tumultuous. Victoria and William frequently reported each other to the police for issues ranging from domestic disputes to assaults. Police reports confirmed this pattern. She threatened to obtain a restraining order against he, while he threatened to have her jailed for making false accusations. A few days before William died, he and Victoria met, but the meeting did not end well. They argued, and William called 911 to request police assistance to evict Victoria from his home. When the police arrived, Victoria claimed that William had hit her, but they saw that she had no injuries. The police discovered that she had sent text messages to his phone with false accusations, claiming he had kidnapped her and threatened her, whereas he was simply asking her to leave him alone. The police helped she pack her belongings and escorted her out of his house. William told her he never wanted to see her again. Although Victoria promised not to bother him anymore, she did not keep her word. A few days later, Victoria began texting William, asking to meet, but he ignored her. She then devised a new plan and contacted his ex-wife, repeatedly harassing his ex-wife. The ex-wife complained to William about her behavior. This upset he, and he sent she a message. He said she are too dangerous to be around, and told her never to contact him or his ex-wife again. The conflict reignited. During another argument, he threatened to report her to the police because she attacked him with a hammer. Victoria was furious because she realized that this could threaten her custody of her beloved son. William's family believed this was the motive for the crime. The relationship between William and Victoria became increasingly complicated and confusing. Although Victoria alleged that she was raped by William, an autopsy found no signs of violence or internal trauma, shows that sexual intercourse was consensual. On her body, there were only 2 small bruises, one on her arm and one on her leg. These bruises appeared old and not the result of a recent struggle, as they were already fading. Her new manicure was intact without any broken nails and showed no signs of a struggle since there were no skin particles under her nails. Furthermore, William did not have any scratches, which was unusual. When the police arrived at the house, Victoria's appearance raised suspicions. While the room was covered in blood, she appeared clean. With no blood on her pajamas or body, and her hair was wet as if she had just showered. The police doubted Victoria's story and suspected her of killing William. Forensic experts thoroughly investigated the scene of the tragedy and concluded that Victoria's testimony was inaccurate. Evidence indicated that William was shot while standing with his back to Victoria. It was believed he was next to the bed, facing the window, when he was hit 3 times. One of the shots caused blood to fill his lungs, leading to a cough. The high blood spatter on the wall next to the window suggested that he was standing when shot. After coughing, he likely fell onto the bed, and Victoria continued shooting him, she firing several more shots into his chest and head. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, everything was neatly in place. This also contradicts Victoria's testimony that a struggle occurred. Victoria was detained and brought to the police station for questioning. Upon hearing she was accused of murdering William, her expression changed drastically, surprised by the accusation. When the police tried to collect her phone as evidence for examination, she tried to snatch it back furiously. This behavior seemed strange to the investigators. It seemed that she was hiding something on the phone and feared it would be discovered. Investigators examined the correspondence between Victoria and William, as well as their phones, revealing that William deeply loved her. He sent heartfelt messages, calling her the love of his life, but expressed concern about her actions. He feared her false accusations might lead to his imprisonment. Subsequent messages from William show a marked change in tone. The investigation uncovered that Victoria had sent herself a threatening message from William's phone to incriminate him. Further evidence showed that Victoria had attacked William on at least 2 occasions, yet she called the police and claimed he attacked her. Victoria threatened to smear her neighbor Plunkett when he tried to evict her from the flat. Victoria Rickman was charged with first-degree murder and held without bail. She finally stood trial for the murder of William Carter in August 2017, after spending almost 4 years in jail. Once a vibrant and attractive woman, famous for her beautiful appearance, Victoria appeared completely different and almost unrecognizable in court. Several men testified about how skillfully she had manipulated them during flirtations, causing them to become infatuated with her and willing to do anything for her. Even some police officers admitted they were captivated by Victoria's beauty and flirtatious behavior when she responded to complaints of domestic violence, make them side with her. These officers later regretted their lack of impartiality. A prime example of Victoria's manipulation was her relationship with Deputy Sheriff Kobe County Price. She reported threats from William to him. Upon seeing bruises on her body, he entrusted her with one of his personal pistols for self-defense. This same pistol was used in the shooting of William. Additionally, the deputy sheriff took Victoria to a shooting range and taught her how to use a gun, and she developed her shooting skills expertly. After William was murdered, Victoria first called Cuba Price and then, on his advice, she called 911. During the trial, Cuba Price admitted he was captivated by Victoria, despite being married at the time. He thought their relationship might evolve, but denied having an affair, stating they were just friends. By the trial, he no longer worked at the sheriff's office and was instead an instructor at the Air Force Base. He had been fired 5 days after William's death for not cooperating with the investigation, as he protected and defended Victoria. The charges alleged that Victoria used her charm to entice William to her home on that tragic night. Sadly, William could no longer share his side of the story, so the prosecutor presented it on his behalf. According to the prosecutor, Victoria called William that evening, inviting him over with the promise of intimacy, thereby luring him into a trap. Once he arrived, she allegedly took advantage of the situation and killed him in cold blood by shooting him 9 times. The prosecutor argued that shooting him 9 times was excessive. Her decisive actions suggested premeditation, leading the prosecutor to conclude that it was a planned murder. Additional evidence supported this conclusion. At the time of the murder, Victoria was living with another man, Andrew, in his house. That night, she asked Andrew to stay at his mother's house so she could be alone and get a good night's sleep. Trusting her, Andrew agreed and went to his mother's. Just half an hour after he left, Victoria contacted William, and he arrived at her house after midnight. It's unclear what she said to him on the phone, but it's presumed she invited him over. There were no signs of forced entry. Victoria herself opened the door for William. He did not break into her home and was unaware of her address until she gave it to him during the call. During the trial, the doctor who examined Victoria after the murder testified, and photos of Victoria were presented. The doctor stated that he found no injuries on her body, including any defensive wounds or fresh bruises. It appeared she had not been raped, as their relationship was consensual. Notably, a bruise on her hand, which she claimed was from a fight with he, was visible in a selfie taken the day before his murder, proving it was unrelated to self-defense. Photographs from the crime scene were also shown at the trial. William's naked body, with multiple gunshot wounds, was found lying face up on the bed. His clothes were on the floor next to the bed, his watch was neatly placed on the nightstand, and he held a gold chain in his left hand. It seemed he was disturbed while dressing, and when he tried to refasten his necklace, he was shot. An expert confirmed that William was shot from behind, indicating he posed no threat to Victoria. An autopsy revealed that William was shot 9 times. 4 times in the chest, 3 in the back, and twice in the head. He also had bruises on his chin and left hand, likely caused by a blunt object. Blood spatters were found on the wall, curtains, and pillows on the floor. The medical examiner suggested that William was facing the window when he was first shot in the back, fell onto the bed, and was then shot the remaining times. During the trial, questions were raised about the reloading of the pistol. The pistol can only hold 12 rounds, yet 9 spent cartridges were found at the scene, leaving 4 bullets in the pistol. This totals 13 bullets, leading the prosecution to conclude that Victoria had reloaded the pistol. If she reloaded, the act could not be deemed as self-defense, as reloading shows premeditation. At the trial, a neighbor named Plankett testified that Victoria had previously threatened him when he attempted to evict her from her apartment. She threatened to accuse him of rape, causing him to back down to avoid trouble. Victoria had filed multiple rape complaints against different men. But no criminal cases were initiated because there was no evidence beyond her claims. The prosecution found it suspicious that all the men around her were accused of rape. The lawyer argued that Victoria was a vulnerable and defenseless woman in life. She had suffered violence from both her first husband and William, her fiancé. On the night of the incident, William broke into her house, assaulted, and raped her, then threatened her life. To protect herself, she used a firearm provided by her friend, the deputy sheriff. The lawyer asserted that this was clearly a case of self-defense. The defense stated that William arrived at Victoria's house intoxicated and under medication. A doctor testified that 3 days before his death, William reported experiencing delirium and was prescribed antipsychotics to aid his sleep. The lawyer also suggested he might have used illegal drugs that night, causing his aggression. However, it remains unknown whether he was intoxicated or on drugs that night, as no toxicology test was conducted. Dr. Chris Lees Perry, the former Georgia chief medical examiner, testified for the defense, indicating that Victoria first shot William in the chest, not the back. During the trial, Victoria's 911 call was played, and the lawyer stressed that the emotions she expressed were genuine and couldn't be faked. She sounded truly desperate. Victoria's best friend testified for the defense, stating that she had seen bruises on Victoria before, which Victoria claimed were caused by William. However, the friend never witnessed any violent incidents and couldn't confirm the bruises were from William. She did recall overhearing William yelling at Victoria on the phone once. Seeing Victoria's distress during that call convinced her that Victoria was a victim of domestic violence and not capable of murder. She believed Victoria acted in self-defense. The defense also highlighted William's troubled past. He had struggled with substance abuse and had been arrested several times for property damage. After 10 years of marijuana use, he went to rehab. William's parents confirmed this thing, but they said that he had overcome his addiction, rebuilt his life, and started a business. They were proud of his recovery and believed that Victoria was his last obsession. They felt that whenever she called, he would rush to her without realizing the potential danger. The prosecution presented a dramatic video recorded on Victoria's mobile phone 4 months before William's death. In the video, she threatened to call the police and accused him of rape after he kicked her out. She acted aggressively, trying to enter the house, but he prevented her. She responded that he could not tell her what to do and that she had a gun and knew how to use it. Her behavior did not seem like that of a typical victim of violence. The conversation concluded as William expressing that Victoria was frightening him, saying he did not want to see her anymore, and then leaving. The prosecution believed something similar occurred on the night of the incident, but with a tragic ending. At the trial, the jury heard 2 different yet plausible stories. They now had to decide which side was more convincing, its self-defense or premeditated murder. The jury reached a verdict in less than an hour, finding Victoria Rickman guilty. She sat silently, devastated by the decision, and cried. She addressed the judge, saying that she believed the jury was wrong. "Thank you for explaining the facts of this case. I am a mother whose son was taken from me." She describes herself as a battered woman who endured years of abuse and suffered nightmares and post-traumatic stress disorder from trying to defend herself. Victoria continued to deny her guilt and showed no remorse for shooting William. As a result, the judge was not lenient and sentenced Victoria to life in prison without parole. Her lawyer was also shocked by the verdict and sentence, considering them unfair. He believed the evidence was circumstantial and unconvincing, and that she deserved the possibility of parole and a more lenient sentence. Victoria is appealing and hopes her case will be reviewed, but so far her requests have been denied. William's daughter is being raised by his mother, and Victoria's son is being raised by her ex-husband. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sion Kingi. Sion Kingi was born in New Zealand on December 16, 1974. When she was 7, her family moved to New Zealand, a small coastal town in Australia with a population of about 5,000. The area is known for its warm, pleasant climate. From a young age, Sion was a kind and gentle person who loved sports, particularly ballet and netball. Although she was naturally modest, she had a charming personality that made her popular among her peers. Sion was tall, had long blonde hair and striking eyes, which helped her stand out in school. Unfortunately, her beautiful appearance eventually led to serious consequences in her life. Friday, November 27, 1987, was an ordinary day. It was a beautiful sunny day. Typically, this time of year features perfect weather, warm sun and a cool breeze, so many locals were enjoying the beach. Sion's mother, Linda, went to the store to buy food and fabric to sew a lovely outfit for her daughter's upcoming birthday. After school, Sion got on her yellow bike, knowing she was going to the store to help her mother Linda choose fabric. Linda wanted to select something Sion would love, so she headed to the store right after classes ended. Once they chose the fabric for the dress, they were only free in the afternoon. After making their purchases, Linda planned to stop by the bakery to buy some treats for dinner. Sion was already feeling tired and wanted to head home. She asked her mother if she could go home by herself first. Her mother agreed, and Sion rode her bike along her favorite shortcut. While she had taken this route many times before, it didn't feel as safe today. In the 1980s, Newzok was a peaceful small town where everyone knew each other, making it one of the safest places in the area. The Kingi family's home was only a few kilometers from the local store, they easily reachable by bike in just a few minutes. Linda felt secure allowing her 12-year-old daughter, Sion, to ride there alone, as nothing bad had ever happened in their quiet town. In fact, her mother would follow her right after buying a few things. At 4:45 p.m., Sion rode her bike toward home, taking a path that went through the park, while Linda drove a different route in her car. Since Sion wasn't biking too quickly, she and her mother were only a few minutes apart. Linda anticipated arriving home just after Sion. However, when returned, Linda found no one at home. Sion was not there, and her yellow bicycle was missing. Initially, Linda wasn't worried about Sion's absence. The girl might have met a friend or stopped by to visit someone, especially with the weekend approaching after a long school week. Teenagers often hang out after classes, and Sion had many friends, so it was normal for her to drop in on someone. Sion had just picked out a beautiful fabric with her mother, Linda, and she could have wanted to share her weekend plans with a friend, as they were also planning to meet up. However, Linda soon began to feel anxious. Sion was well-behaved and never stayed out long without permission. Then, Linda decided to call several of Sion's friends to check if she was with them. To her dismay, no one had seen Sion. By 8 p.m., Sion still hadn't returned home. Although they lived in a small, quiet town with little traffic, Sion always respected the curfew and never wandered outside after dark. On Friday evenings, people often relax and take walks after work. As darkness falls, even the safest towns can become risky. Linda recognized this, so she chose to walk the route that Sion typically took on her bike. This path was the quickest way from their home on the outskirts to the shops in the city. Linda and her husband walked together, and about halfway there, they discovered Sion's yellow bicycle abandoned, but they did not see the girl. The abandoned bike raised concerns, especially since it was Sion's first bike, one she had cherished and would never willingly leave behind. Unfortunately, they couldn't find Sion nearby. Her parents called for her, but there was no answer. They decided to head to the police station. Before leaving, they checked their house to see if Sion had returned and bring a picture of her. With the photo in hand, they went to meet the police. The officers took their report about Sion's disappearance and officially declared her missing. The community was tight-knit, and the city had an extremely low crime rate, so everyone believed Sion would be found quickly. This situation seems to stem from a simple misunderstanding. Sion might have been hanging out with friends or got lost while walking in the forest. However, one officer recalled that there had been a kidnapping in the area shortly before this incident. To address the situation, the police reached out to local media, as they did not have access to social networks or the internet at the time. The following morning, a report about Sion's disappearance was broadcasted, in hopes of finding witnesses who might have seen her the night before. Several people came to the police station with information, but they all insisted they hadn't noticed anything suspicious. These witnesses had seen Linda and Sion while they were picking out fabric for a dress, but none of them saw Sion on their way home, and no one was on the path at that time. The witnesses provided varying details and tried to highlight any unusual occurrences, such as strange cars or odd behavior from local residents. However, they saw that was watching Linda and Sion. A witness reported seeing a dirty white station wagon on the evening of the incident. When police were notified, they discovered the car contained a dark-haired man and a heavy-set woman. They seemed to be aimlessly driving around, possibly searching for someone. It's conceivable that Sion might have come into contact with them. Witnesses noticed this suspicious couple shortly before Sion went missing. The police working on the case noted there were approximately 170,000 station wagons in the area, with about 10,000 of them being white. As a result, the search area has been much wider. Investigators needed to examine all the cars in the region and pursue additional leads. Many police officers and hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Friends, family, neighbors, and members of the community came together to assist in the search for Sion. Ground and air search teams were organized, and photographs of the location where Sion went missing were taken and shared with the media. This method is often used to help potential witnesses recall details about what happened that day. No one was able to provide useful information to the police at first. However, by Sunday, several new witnesses came forward and aided the investigation. The first witness was sunbathing by a stream in the forest when she was attacked by an unknown man. He harassed her and attempted to drag her into his car, which was identified as a white Kingwood station wagon. A second witness saw the incident and assisted the girl in fending off her attacker. Afterward, this witness followed the suspicious vehicle when the driver tried to flee the scene, but he eventually lost sight of them. He managed to give a detailed description of the car and provided the police with its license plate number, 429. The detectives decided to check the phone number associated with the car with that plate number. They found that this number was registered in the area. It belonged to a woman named Valmay Beck. The detectives quickly located her address and visited her home. A man answered the door and confirmed he knew Valmay. He explained that he was not her relative, but her stepson. He also added that her husband was Barry, and they had been married for a year. The description of Barry's closely matched the composite sketch created from the witness's account of the attack near the stream. The suspect's name was Barry Watts. However, the police lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him or accuse him of kidnapping Sion. Despite this, both Barry and Valmay were viewed as potential suspects in the case. Unfortunately, the man didn't know Barry and Valmay's whereabouts. They frequently moved and rented different places, which seemed suspicious. 3 days after Sion disappeared, another witness came forward with information. This witness also reported seeing a white Holden Kingwood near the creek and described the driver as athletic, mentioning a plump woman who was acting suspiciously. After conducting a background check on Barry and Valmay, the police discovered that both had recently been released from prison in Perth, Western Australia, right before Sion went missing. Both Barry and Valmay had extensive criminal records. Just weeks prior, they relocated to Queensland from Perth, pausing their criminal activities after serving their parole. They arrived in a sedan but quickly switched to a white station wagon, which had been linked to several suspicious incidents. The police recognized that they were dealing with dangerous individuals with a long history of armed robberies, break-ins, and forgery related to obtaining fraudulent documents. This was just a portion of Barry and Valmay's criminal history. This news was alarming for the Sion family. If their daughter, Sion, became involved with these individuals, her chances of being found alive and safe were slim. At the time, Barry was 33 years old, and Valmay was 43. Valmay had 6 children from previous relationships. Both police and Sion's family viewed Barry and Valmay as particularly dangerous criminal wanted. The authorities urgently needed to locate them to investigate their connection to Sion's disappearance. 6 days after Sion went missing, a man named Tim visited the police station to report bad news. He reported that the night before, as he was heading to work, he noticed a terrible, foul smell that initially made him think an animal had died nearby. On his way back, he felt compelled to check the area again and was hit by a strong smell of decay. At the side of the road near the stream, he discovered the body of a teenage girl. She was wearing a school uniform and had blonde hair. The police quickly arrived at the location provided by Tim and discovered the mutilated body of a schoolgirl. It was evident that she had been sexually assaulted. The autopsy revealed that she had been strangled, and her body had 12 stab wounds, 3 near her heart and 2 cuts on her throat. Additionally, her spine was broken, and her arms were so badly damaged they were nearly severed from her body. The level of violence indicated that her death was extremely painful. The police suspected that this victim was the missing girl, Sion. She was wearing the same clothes as described by Sion's mother. In the laboratory, a forensic expert confirmed that the victim was 12 years old Sion Kingi. 5 days after this gruesome discovery, family Sion's and friends came together to say their final goodbyes at her funeral. During the ceremony, a classmate read a passage from Peter Pan, suggesting that the girl would always be remembered. Flowers were placed along the route where the young girl had been found. Following media coverage of the incident, a nurse named Nicole Close contacted the police. She reported having seen some suspicious individuals in the area, they driving a white station wagon. One evening, after finishing her shift at the hospital, Nicole was walking through the parking lot to her car when she noticed a white car entering the lot and slowly approaching her. Sensing something was off, she quickly ran to her car, jumped inside, and locked the door. The station wagon did not back away but parked next to her passenger door. A man then got out and approached her window, asking for help with directions. Although he seemed calm and friendly, but she felt uneasy and wanted to end the conversation quickly. She noticed a suspicious-looking woman in the station wagon and thought she saw ropes in the back, which heightened her anxiety. The man continued to speak politely and stepping closer. Despite Nicole explaining the directions multiple times, he kept asking the same question and moved closer to her. Just as he was only a few steps away, Nicole spotted another man walking through the parking lot. The driver noticed him too, which distracted him and gave Nicole the chance to escape. She quickly backed into her car, locked the door, and drove away. Nicole recalled that this incident occurred on November 2nd, before Sion went missing. Investigators viewed the reports about the white car as significant and pursued this lead. Detectives showed Nicole a lineup of photographs featuring unfamiliar faces, and she clearly identified Barry and Valmay. But the testimonies didn't end there. The day after Nicole spoke to the police, another eyewitness came forward with information about a different attempted kidnapping. He reported seeing a man attack a woman on the street, holding a knife to her throat and trying to drag her into a white station wagon. The victim fought back, injuring the attacker's hand with his own knife, and managed to escape. Police then discovered fingerprints belonging to Barry on the woman's car. She also identified Barry and Valmay as likely involved in kidnappings, rapes, and murders in the area. The officers recognized that they were dealing with particularly dangerous criminals who posed a threat to the entire community. They issued descriptions of the suspects, Barry and Valmay, and their white car, making the information public through the media. Although it seemed the criminals were in hiding, but arrest warrants have been sent to police departments nationwide, indicating the possibility that they will be caught soon. In a small town, a local power grid worker was installing wiring when he spotted a car that matched the description of Barry and Valmay's station wagon. He remembered it because of a media alert he had seen a few days earlier. After coming down from his work, he was convinced that this was the car the police were looking for. He quickly went to the police station to mark the location on a map where he had seen the vehicle. When the patrol officers arrived, Barry and Valmay had already fled. Although the police tried to chase them, they lost track of Barry and Valmay once again. Later, the department received a tip about a money transfer made by Barry and Valmay as they were leaving New South Wales. The station wagon was tracked to a motel parking lot, and fortunately, it was still there when the police arrived. The hotel staff allowed the officers to access Barry and Valmey's room. Understanding that they were dealing with potentially armed and dangerous criminals, the officers prepared their weapons. To their surprise, Barry and Valmey did not put up a fight and were arrested in the motel room. The police discovered wigs, hair dye, and a hair clipper, suggesting that they was attempting to change their appearance to evade capture. The suspects, Barry and Valmey, were interrogated for about 12 hours, during which they remained completely silent. Barry did not cooperate at all. He informed the police that he had conspired with his wife, Valmey, to ensure she maintained the same story and did not reveal any important information. In contrast, Valmey quickly gave in. She thought that by doing so, she could reduce her sentence. What she revealed to the authorities was chilling. On November 27th, Valmey claimed that she and Barry were driving around the city in search of a new victim. Barry had an obsession with violence against women, particularly targeting those who were much younger than him. His wife, Valmey, being 10 years older, did not fit his preferences. To fulfill his disturbing desires, Barry started to rape and murder girls who fit his idea of youth and beauty. Valmey claimed she went along with his actions because she was afraid of losing him. On the morning of Sion's disappearance, they spent several hours driving around, believing that finding a girl would be easy. However, most of the girls were with others, making it difficult to kidnap someone discreetly. Barry attempted to approach a number of girls himself, but they managed to evade him. Eventually, he realized that he was not as trustworthy as his wife, so he decided to use Valmey as bait to attract the girls. They parked near a local park and got out of the car. While walking along the trail, they noticed a girl on a yellow bicycle. Barry selected her as his target, and Valmey pretended to be in distress, asking the girl for help because she was having trouble with her dog. Sion, a kind-hearted girl, came Valmey and engaging in conversation. At that moment, Barry attacked Sion from behind, muffling her screams and dragging her into his dirty car. Inside, he restrained her with tape. Valmey sat in the back seat with Sion, while Barry drove away. They traveled 12 kilometers from where the abduction occurred and stopped in a forest. There, Barry laid out a blanket and started raping Sion for several hours, fulfilling his twisted desires. Valmey later reported that Sion showed incredible courage throughout the process of being raped by Barry, she enduring the abuse without crying. She complied with Barry's demands, hoping her obedience would somehow spare her life and that they might let her go. However, from the start, Barry never planned to let her live. His intent was to satisfy his twisted fantasies. Barry started to strangle the Sion and stabbed her with a knife, causing fatal injuries. Throughout this horrific scene, Valmey watched without intervening. She later reported that the belt used for strangling Sion, along with the knife and other items, were discarded nearby in a stream. The police went to the specified location, and Valmey provided them with details about the crime scene. They were able to recover evidence, including light-colored hair that seemed to belong to Sion. Valmey's confession took up 28 pages, describing the terrible ordeal the young victim Sion endured before her death. Although Barry remained unyielding during the interrogation, he became enraged upon learning of his wife's confession, Valmey. To ensure Barry was convicted, investigators attempted to extract a confession from him. However, they were unable to do so. As a result, they decided to use a complex strategy. They planned to place an undercover agent in the temporary detention cell where Barry was held. This spy will spend time with Barry as a fellow prisoner, aiming to establish a friendly relationship with him, which will hopefully lead to receiving a confession from him. A special spy was chosen for this dangerous mission because he was able to withstand the psychological pressure that the mission would cause. He was supposed to listen to Barry confess about the brutal treatment of Sion. But ultimately, this mission did not result in a confession. Meanwhile, Barry remained agitated and was desperately trying to escape punishment. During one meeting with his wife, Val May, he subtly suggested that she should end her life before the trial to avoid testifying against him. He implied that if she chose not to, she would face serious consequences according to state law. Barry communicated with his wife very cautiously, carefully choosing his words to prevent the authorities from using their phone conversations against him. Fortunately, Val May did not listen to Barry, which ultimately saved her life. When Barry and Val May arrived at court, around 200 people were present, ready to confront the brutal murderers. During the trial, Val May testified against her husband, Barry, portraying him as a true monster. She tried to defend herself by claiming she was coerced into the horrific acts. However, there was strong evidence suggesting she participated willingly. On October 20, 1988, the jury began deliberating on the verdict. After 3 hours, the jurors found the defendants Barry and Val May guilty. Val May Beck received a sentence of 10 years for kidnapping and life in prison for murder. However, due to her cooperation with the prosecution, she was granted the possibility of temporary release. The jury spent 6 hours discussing Barry's sentence. Finally, Barry Watts was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and rape, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His case was officially archived, meaning he would not be eligible for release. However, the story of Barry and Val May didn't end in prison. Barry started bragging about his crimes and told a cellmate that he had committed a similar offense. He mentioned the murder of 31-year-old teacher, Helen Marie Fenney, who went missing on October 29 of that year. Investigators later discovered that Val May was also involved in this incident. Val May admitted to witnessing her husband murder the teacher Helen, after which they placed her body in the trunk of their car and disposed of it in a landfill near Brisbane. Barry remained silent during police questioning, refusing to provide any information about the second victim, Helen. He seemed to hope to challenge the verdict in Sion's case in the future. However, in 2007, he confessed to murdering Sion and detailing the crime. Val May endured assaults while in her cell, suffering regular beatings, including a severe head injury from a tin can. To ensure her safety, she was transferred to a more secure correctional facility. During her time there, she converted to Christianity and started to make positive changes in her life. Val May applied for parole 3 times but was denied each time. In 2007, she divorced her husband, Barry. She also struggled with serious health issues, such as obesity and diabetes. In 2008, her health declined significantly, leading doctors to place her in an induced coma immediately after heart surgery. The police hoped that while she was on her deathbed, she would confess to additional crimes that she and Barry was suspected of, including numerous kidnappings, rapes, and murders in the area. Sadly, she passed away at the age of 64 without regaining consciousness, taking with her all the secrets of their horrific crimes. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of MacDonald family. Jeffrey MacDonald was born on October 12, 1943, in New York, USA. He was a well-known figure in his youth, serving as the quarterback for his high school football team and being very popular among his peers. After graduating from Princeton, Jeffrey attended medical school and completed an internship at a prestigious medical center in New York. He married Colette Stevenson, a high school acquaintance. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed their daughter Kimberly, and 3 years later, their son Kristen was born. After completing his education, Jeffrey joined the Army and was later accepted into the elite Green Berets. In the next 2 years, Jeffrey was assigned to the Fort Bragg military base in North Carolina. After a period of frequent relocations, their life finally became stable. They settled in the nearby city of Fayetteville and lived in a house provided by the state. Jeffrey returned home from work at 6 p.m. and no longer had to go on business trips, which allowed Colette to feel more at ease. She hoped that once Jeffrey completed his service in a few years, they could move to their own farmhouse, away from the city's hustle and bustle. At the time of the tragedy, Colette was pregnant with their third child, and everything seemed perfect. Their love story tragically turned into one of the most horrific crime episodes in U.S. history. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on February 17, 1970, the operator of the Fayetteville Rescue Service received a call from a man identifying himself as Captain Jeffrey McDonald. He reported that a violent attack had taken place in his home, stating that his wife had been stabbed to death and possibly raped. He was unclear about the fate of his children and urged for immediate assistance. The dispatcher quickly dispatched a police car to the scene. As the police were heading to the house, they saw a strange woman standing in the rain at 3:55 a.m., wearing a wide-brimmed hat. She was doing nothing and appeared to be waiting for something. However, the officers didn't have time to investigate further, so they drove past her. A few minutes later, they arrived at the Jeffrey family home, where the police entered through the back door because the lights inside were off. In the first room, officers discovered the body of a woman lying on the floor, showing no signs of life. She was covered in blood, and her position suggested she may have been raped. Her face was severely disfigured. She lay on her back next to her injured husband. As the first officer approached, Jeffrey urgently inquired about the fate of his children, whom he had heard screaming but could not get to. Another police officer searched the other rooms and found a brutal scene in the children's bedroom, where they discovered the mutilated head of 5-year-old Kimberly, with her neck and upper body also bearing multiple stab wounds. In another room, 2-year-old Kristen lay on the bed, suffering from multiple injuries to his back and chest. Jeffrey was in serious condition, having been stabbed in the head and upper chest. At one point, he lost consciousness, but a police officer was able to revive him to gather information about the incident. Jeffrey reported that 3 men and 1 woman had broken into the house. He suspected they were hippies, noting that one of the men was dark-skinned and wore a jacket with a sergeant's insignia. He also described a suspicious woman in a hat whom the police had encountered earlier, but unfortunately, it was too late to find her that night. Jeffrey was the only survivor of the attack that night, while the others sadly did not make it. He received first aid to treat his wounds, including a serious lung injury, and was given a sedative. Once stabilized, police spoke with him about the incident. He recounted that he and his wife had shared a glass of orange juice mixed with alcohol that evening. Since their daughter was sleeping, he decided to sleep on the couch in the living room. Jeffrey falls asleep in front of the TV but suddenly wakes up to intense pain. He is being attacked by 3 unidentified assailants. A woman in a hat stands to one side, holding a flashlight or candle, watching the attack. Jeffrey thinks the attackers look like hippies on drugs. The woman gives orders to the men. Chaos then erupts, and Jeffrey loses consciousness. When he regains consciousness, he finds his wife unresponsive. He tries to give her first aid, but to no avail. Desperate to get to his children, he finds himself unable to move due to his injuries, so he calls 911. The Army Criminal Investigation Department sent the most inexperienced police staff to the scene. After examining the area, he concluded that Jeffrey's story was not true. The officer found the story of Jeffrey, with the hippies, unlikely. He found no evidence that others were present. After this decision, the investigation shifted its focus to proving Jeffrey's guilt. The head of the McDonald family was arrested and Jeffrey was charged with 3 counts of criminal conspiracy. The case quickly turned into a disaster. From the outset, Jeffrey's defense attorneys aimed to assess the professionalism of the police during the search of the house. Through cross-examination, it was discovered that numerous violations had occurred. The procedures used had compromised the integrity of the evidence and the crime scene. The area had been essentially trampled, making it extremely difficult to identify any traces left by the criminals. This situation allowed the defense to argue that the prosecution's conclusion about Jeffrey's involvement in the crimes was incorrect, and that the killers were strangers, hippies. Jeffrey was a devoted family man, a caring father and husband, and a respected professional. As a result, he had many supporters, including colleagues who believed in his innocence. They felt there was no motive for the murder and found it hard to believe he would harm himself just to fake a near-death experience. His grandfather, Freddie Cassap, was so upset that he started a nationwide campaign to prove Jeffrey's innocence. Meanwhile, an article criticized the military justice system for holding closed hearings that excluded the public and the media. The situation did not improve. The trial remained hidden from public view, with more evidence later presented to the Supreme Court highlighting police incompetence. The investigation was sloppy. The ambulance driver tampered with evidence at the scene and even stole Jeffrey's wallet while police were present. An army doctor compromised crucial evidence, including hair samples needed for comparison. Fingerprints were mixed up with various items such as a phone and a baby bottle. Most of the people involved in the investigation were inexperienced and unprofessional. The number of violations identified continued to grow with each minute of questioning. The investigation received an unexpected tip about a young woman seen on the street in the rain, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Her name was Helena Stokely. Helena was the daughter of a retired Army officer and had a troubled connection with the criminal world. While she was a police informant, she was also deeply involved in the hippie culture and had been selling illegal substances for many years. The police interviewed Helena and obtained valuable information about her associates. However, serious mistakes occurred during the interrogation. Notably, the police failed to record the conversation, which was necessary for presenting evidence in court. The inexperienced police claimed that the investigation into Helena's involvement was still ongoing. However, the situation worsened so much that the police simply did not know where she was. She fled when everyone realized the full scale of the incompetence that was committed during the Army investigation. The investigation must start all over again on all issues. Despite this, the military leadership still kept the hearing closed to the media. Meanwhile, one police officer chose to share information with journalists about the mistakes made by the Army Commission of the Armed Forces. This angered the military leadership even more. While everyone else believed he was innocent, the military commission refused to acknowledge their own incompetence. Unfortunately, they held significant power and were unwilling to back down. They asserted that, although there was no clear motive for the crime, Jeffrey might have used substances that could provoke aggression and potentially lead to murder. Contrary to the prosecution's allegations, witnesses began to testify that Jeffrey was a loving husband and father. The defense presented a large body of evidence in support of this view. Furthermore, at the time of the massacre, Jeffrey was in a stable mental state. Only a small amount of alcohol was found in his system, which would not have significantly impaired his judgment or led him to commit such violent acts. Along with friends and family who testified, qualified experts, including a psychiatrist, evaluated Jeffrey and concluded that he was sane and had no homicidal tendencies toward his family. Even the civil police believed that Jeffrey was innocent due to the lack of evidence against him. His mother had to sell their house to afford legal fees. Ultimately, he was cleared of charges due to insufficient evidence. However, this did not stop the Army Commission from reopening the investigation later on. The military police promised to persist in their efforts to convict Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, regardless of the previous investigation's flaws. They believed that their earlier mistakes did not rule out the possibility of Jeffrey's guilt. The situation was not serious and did not significantly affect the outcome. Jeffrey resigned from the U.S. Army. Disillusioned with the military, he began a campaign to expose the armed forces through the media. However, he was unaware of the powerful enemies he was facing and the dangers that would be placed upon him. Meanwhile, the police found Helena Stokely. She claimed to have witnessed the murder of the MacDonald family, allegedly committed by her friends. Helena was willing to testify in court, hoping to be granted immunity from prosecution. Her testimony was verified through a lie detector test. Despite this, the military leadership refused to consider any other suspects, focusing solely on Jeffrey and preparing to charge him again. In the summer of 1971, Jeffrey and a friend moved to Long Beach, California, in search of a fresh start. Initially not realizing that a conspiracy was brewing against him, they both found jobs in the emergency department of a medical center, where their efforts helped make it the best department in the entire facility. Jeffrey's skills were highly regarded, leading to his work being published in medical journals. He also became an advocate for children's rights, fighting against child abuse. The military prosecutor's office continued to reopen the case, and on the grounds that they had obtained Jeffrey's psychiatric reports, he was charged again. The trial was scheduled for mid-1979 and a smear campaign began. It was a high-profile case, and from the start, the armed forces were formed to fight Jeffries. And at that time, people from the highest echelons of power rallied against Jeffrey, a former Army captain. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Blackburn wanted to use the case as a springboard for his career. He was later convicted of forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. But at the time of the triple murder retrial, Jeffrey's reputation was impeccable. The assistant prosecutor had concealed evidence that proved Jeffrey's innocence. And the Attorney General was not even allowed to conduct his own independent examination of the evidence collected or review the case file. It was clear that the judge was biased toward the prosecution, which affected the outcome of the trial. Any evidence that could have proven that Jeffrey innocent was not presented to the jury or provided to Jeffrey's attorney. For example, the victim was found holding 5 strands of light-colored hair. The prosecution claimed that these hairs came from a doll owned by the victim's daughter. However, they actually belonged to Helena Stokely, who was wearing a light-colored wig that she removed shortly after the murder. Additionally, a hair belonging to Jeffrey was found in the victim's hand, but since he lived there, this was not unusual and could have been a coincidence. This evidence did not prove Jeffrey's guilt. The skin particles found under Kimberly and Kristen's fingernails were not their father's and were identified as belonging to the attackers. However, the particles were never analyzed and eventually disappeared. This evidence, along with much else that could have proven Jeffrey's innocence, was deliberately ignored at trial. A key part of the prosecution's case was the pajama fibers found on the chisel believed to have been used to kill Jeffrey's children. The prosecution claimed the chisel was the weapon used and contained particles from the clothing Jeffrey was wearing when police found him on the night of the triple murder. Years later, it was discovered that these claims were false. Police found several black fibers on the chisel that matched those found on the bodies of Kristen and Kimberly. However, these fibers did not match any of the clothing from the MacDonald's home. Additionally, wax droplets were found at the crime scene that did not match any of the candles from the victims' homes. These wax droplets were actually used by Helena Stokely in her rituals. Helena claimed to be a witch and practiced magic, which became a key factor in the case. The prosecution made a strong claim that fibers from Jeffrey's pajamas were found in Colette's hair. However, this claim was later proven to be false. The defense attorney, Jeffrey, was unable to object to this assertion at the hearing because it had never been mentioned before. There were also other false pieces of evidence, including claims of bloody marks on the couple's bed sheets, which the prosecution argued indicated that the husband had dragged his wife's body. It was later revealed that these bloody marks did not exist. Furthermore, the prosecution was unaware of important information at the hearing, specifically, the prosecution was unaware that Helena Stokely had contacted the FBI in 1978, claiming that she was involved in a triple homicide while she was being treated for depression and had attempted to end her life in the hospital. During the trial, Helena said that on the day of the massacre, she was with her boyfriend Greg Mitchell and some soldiers from Fort Braga. They were all using drugs, and according to her, they lost control. Helena mentioned that she called the McDonald family's house late at night to check if everyone was home, but she couldn't remember what happened afterward. The military police then approached her, and she felt so intimidated that during the second trial, she was unable to recount events between midnight and 5 a.m. However, she did acknowledge having a hat and a light wig, which were later destroyed because they could potentially serve as evidence against her. At trial, Helena claimed she had been present at the massacre, holding a candle and muttering strange incantations. However, she maintained that she had not harmed any of the McDonald family. She felt sick when her friends were near the children, prompting her to flee the house. It is thought that the murders were not random. Helena's friends may have been motivated by revenge. The soldiers were angry that Dr. Jeffrey had refused to give them illegal substances. Helena passed a polygraph test 3 times, and her statements were validated. Despite this, her testimony was deemed unreliable. The judge imposed restrictions on providing information about Helena and her soldier friends, which became one of the obstacles for Jeffrey's defense. The defense relied on the psychological profile and personal qualities of the accused to convince the jury of his inability to commit murder. The judge allowed the use of previously collected data, but only if Jeffrey underwent another examination by a psychiatrist. This request was of course a trap, as the psychiatrist had been cooperating with the military for 8 years while the investigation was ongoing. The prosecutor's office, eager to put Jeffrey behind bars for good, asked the doctor to make a finding. After a brief interrogation, the doctor declared Jeffrey a psychopathic murderer. Ultimately, the court refused to allow the use of Jeffrey's previous psychiatric records, which had been obtained from another psychiatrist. Instead, the jury was presented with the new psychiatrist's report, which had a devastating effect on the defense. The prosecution replaced Jeffrey's rosy image with that of a true monster. The jury found Jeffrey McDonald guilty of murdering his wife, Colette, and their 2 children, Kimberly and Kristen. Sentenced him to 3 life terms. Even with this, the revenge of the military police leadership was not over. After learning that Fort Braga soldiers had a serious problem with illegal substances, the unit's leadership was unprepared for such problems, which coincided with the emergence of the burgeoning hippie movement. Under Jeffrey, the situation became more difficult for the soldiers to access, which made them unhappy. Later, some gathered to go to Jeffrey's house to take revenge. Helena's guilt was unquestionable. Even her husband, whom she married in the 80s, believed she was involved. He thought she hadn't committed murder but was likely a witnessed the incident. Helena shared many details about the crime scene that had never been made public at the time. The girl was present in McDonald's house on that fateful night, and this is well established. She underwent 3 polygraph tests, all supporting her account of being there. Her testimony was also recorded on video. According to her, when they entered the house, they forced Jeffrey to write a prescription for Zach, which led to a fight that resulted in the murder of Jeffrey's family members. Jeffrey was left alive, turned into a martyr. The criminals wrote death to all pigs on the wall, likely trying to imitate Charles Manson, who was widely known at that time. Helena passed away at the age of 30 due to complications from liver disease. This incident occurred in 1970, and Helena's testimony was recorded with the judge's approval. At the time of the triple murder, her boyfriend, Greg Michel, was a soldier struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from Vietnam. As a result, he started using drugs heavily and had to enter treatment once more due to his addiction. He later admitted to a friend that he was involved in the MacDonald family's murder. At the crime scene, several pieces of evidence were collected, including Greg's blood and hair samples. It was noted that he was left-handed, and an independent expert determined that the knife wounds were likely made with the left hand. Additionally, he had liver issues, which prevented him from testifying during the trial. Jeffrey MacDonald's fatal mistake was befriending writer Joe McGinnis. They met just before his retrial, and Jeffrey asked Joe to write a book about his case. Jeffrey believed this would give him an advantage in the upcoming hearings. Jeffrey then allowed Joe to attend all of the meetings in detail. In return, Jeffrey received a portion of the book's advance from the publisher and agreed not to contest the book's contents. The friendship between the two men grew stronger. Joe supported Jeffrey and convinced him that Joe was still defending Jeffrey's innocence. However, Joe eventually betrayed Jeffrey by portraying him as the true monster in his book. From private conversations, Joe discovered that just before the triple murder, Jeffrey had taken diet pills, which were quite strong at that time. Although this was an isolated incident, Joe exaggerated the situation, suggesting that Jeffrey was taking 3 pills daily, which could have led to a serious overdose. Joe claimed this was the cause of Jeffrey's anger and violent behavior towards his family. He even pointed to a specific incident: Jeffrey's daughter had wet his side of the bed. In a normal family, the father would not react angrily to such an incident, but Joe saw it as the reason why Jeffrey, the man who was supposed to love his family, lost control. Joe believed that, under the influence of drugs, he had gone psychotic and ended up killing an entire family. However, a toxicology test found no drugs in Jeffrey's system, only a small amount of alcohol. During the trial, Joe said he had changed his mind about Jeffrey's guilt, believing it was more financially beneficial to Jeffrey. The controversial book did significant damage to Jeffrey's reputation. As a result, support for Jeffrey's innocence dwindled. However, Jeffrey successfully sued the book's author for libel. In August 1980, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit seeking millions in damages. After several hearings, the court awarded him $325,000. While most of the compensation was placed in a trust, Jeffrey retained the right to continue his fight for justice against the author. Jeffrey's story resonated with many people. Several well-known lawyers believed in his innocence and volunteered their services to help secure his acquittal. Despite their efforts, numerous appeals were rejected in 1989. However, during the trial and the review of the court's decision, new evidence emerged that supported Jeffrey's claim of non-involvement in the triple murder, including results from examinations. Unfortunately, the same judge presided over the proceedings. This judge continued to hinder the defense team, demonstrating a lack of impartiality throughout the case. A significant breakthrough during this time was the advent of new DNA testing technologies that allowed Jeffrey's defense team to conduct their own analyses. Sadly, at this stage, the judge repeatedly obstructed the lawyers' efforts to seek justice. Information about Helena Stokely finally emerged. A video of her testimony was made available to the lawyers. By this point, Jeffrey, the wrongfully convicted man, had spent 20 years in prison but had never stopped fighting for his freedom. Meanwhile, the military prosecutor's office continued to resist, attempting to dispute all the new evidence. Additional witnesses were found, some of whom had been intimidated and coerced into supporting the prosecution. Stokely, the MacDonald family's nanny, admitted to the prosecution that she had been at the MacDonald's home during the murders. She also revealed that the prosecution had threatened to prosecute her if she testified in court, which discouraged her from speaking out. Prosecutor Blackburn was eventually convicted of several charges, including forgery, theft, and embezzlement, and was remanded in custody in January 2006. New evidence came to light, suggesting a possible retrial. First, a videotaped confession by Helena Stokely was made public, followed by the release of evidence supporting Stokely's claim. DNA testing showed that hair and tissue found on the victim did not match anyone known and belonged to a stranger. In March 2006, a man came forward to the police, claiming that he had been drinking regularly at a bar with a man who had confessed to the MacDonald murders. This man turned out to be Lena's boyfriend, Greg Mitchell. The last time he had heard details of the case was a few weeks before Greg's death. The cashier at the store near the house, Jeffrey, claimed that he saw a group of hippies enter the store the morning after the murders. They looked unkempt, were covered in blood, and were talking to each other about the crime they had committed. However, they then threatened him with his life. The cashier recognized Greg and Helena among this group. An employee at the rehabilitation center where Greg Mitchell was treated also claimed that he had repeatedly confessed to her that he had killed the Jeffrey MacDonald's wife and children, even writing his initials on the wall of the center. Unfortunately, all of this evidence was ignored by the court. 54 years have passed since the tragic murder of the MacDonald family. Defenders at the Supreme Court are still trying to prove Jeffrey's innocence by filing appeals. His most recent appeal against his conviction was in 2021, but was dismissed. Jeffrey remains in prison but still holds out hope that he will one day be free again. While in prison, he met Catherine, an activist involved in the Innocence movement, and they developed a relationship. She visited him regularly and eventually married. Catherine runs a website dedicated to Jeffrey's case, working to secure his release. The 80-year-old, who has spent most of his life in prison, argues that those who actually committed the crime are still walking free. Many of those responsible have lived their entire lives without facing justice, and some have even died without being held accountable for their actions. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rita Polite. On December 4, 1998, Michael Polite was at home in the small town of Hopewell, Missouri, United States. At the time, his mother, Rita, was working at a local bar. While she was working her shift, Michael was home alone. Feeling bored, he decided to ride his bike to the nearest store, a supermarket where he often met his friends. When he got there, he ran into his 15-year-old friend, Josh Sansu. Michael invited Josh over and Josh agreed, and Josh spent the night at Michael's house. They passed the time playing chess and video games while they waited. When Michael's mother came home from work, he saw the headlights flashing on the sunroof and realized she was home. After Rita got home, she told the children to go to bed. Michael then woke up near dawn. In his room, he was lying in bed and noticed a strange smoke coming from the crack in the door. Josh, who was sleeping on the floor near Michael's bed, suddenly woke up and looked at him in fear. Michael started calling for his mother, but there was no response. Tensions escalated, and the children began to panic. When they left Michael's room to go to their mother's room, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Josh and Michael saw Rita's legs covered in blood. Their mother's upper body was on fire. Rita was engulfed in flames up to her waist. Without hesitation, Michael ran to get water to put out the fire, calling out to her in the hope that she would answer, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Josh ran to a neighbor's house for help because they did not have a cell phone. By 6:30 a.m., emergency services arrived and firefighters began to put out the fire. After extinguishing the fire, Michael called his sister, Crystal, to share the heartbreaking news. When police arrived at the scene, they found a young man sitting on his bed, in a state of shock. He was unable to stand up and struggled to speak clearly. The horrific sight and smell of burning flesh haunted him forever. Police quickly began an investigation. It was clear that the victim had suffered a traumatic brain injury. She had been struck in the head with a blunt object before being set on fire. The fire chief examined both the body and the crime scene. He quickly determined that gasoline or fuel had been used to start the fire. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene but found no murder weapon. Police quickly suspected the son of killing his mother. Rita's death was motivated by cruelty and hatred towards her. Rita was only 40 years old at the time. In addition to Michael, she had two adult daughters, Crystal and Melanie, both in their early 20s. Rita's family lived in Hopewell, Missouri, a town where residents felt safe enough to leave their homes and cars unattended. It seemed like a peaceful haven, untouched by the violence of the outside world. Sadly, even in such places, terrible crimes can still happen. The town had a friendly atmosphere and the crime rate was so low that most locals often left their doors open at night. Michael's mother, Rita, left the door open without considering the potential danger, which may explain why there was no forced entry. The police's attention was now focused on Rita's son, Michael. Michael's parents, Edward and Rita, met when they were young and eventually married. Their first children were twins named Crystal and Melanie. The girls had vivid memories of their father's cruelty. Although Rita loved Edward very much, he often cheated on her and eventually became abusive, both emotionally and physically. Unable to bear this treatment any longer, Rita decided to get the police involved. The children often witnessed their father's violent outbursts, which later led to behavioral problems, especially in Michael. About a year before the massacre, the family dynamics worsened significantly. During this time, Michael witnessed Edward physically attack Rita. He knocked her to the ground with several blows and began to strangle her. Michael and his sisters were terrified for their mother's life. Fortunately, the children managed to distract Edward, allowing Rita to escape from his grip. Following this incident, the family faced many challenges. In the summer of 1998, after over 20 years of marriage, Rita filed for divorce. Edward sought joint custody of their children, but the kids did not want to live with him. Rita chose not to escalate the situation. When filing for divorce, she cited her husband's infidelity but did not mention the years of abuse she endured. As a result, the court awarded shared custody, forcing the children to visit their father, whom they despised. Michael and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office. Although the teens were clearly not ready to talk, the police began an immediate investigation. On the way to the police station, the patrol car driver noticed Michael making strange comments and showing little emotion. Although the body had not been identified, Michael insisted that it was his mother, since there was no one else in the house. The police, ignoring the possibility that Michael might be in shock and not fully comprehending what he was saying, became increasingly suspicious of his involvement in the incident. At the police station, Michael underwent a voice stress test, which is also known as voice stress analysis. After the test, the officers informed him that he had failed, but this could be attributed to the trauma he experienced after witnessing his mother's death. Furthermore, voice stress tests are controversial and their results are often considered unreliable, usually not accepted as evidence in court. The police also took Michael's shoes, and specially trained dogs detected traces of flammable substances on them, suggesting they were used to ignite Rita's body after the murder. The Michael seemed to be attempting to hide his actions. Michael and Josh both claimed they had no idea what had happened. They were questioned without a lawyer present. According to the teenagers, they had been in Michael's room for some time, sleeping, and had not heard anything that had happened. Michael claimed that he had been in bed and had only come out when he smelled smoke. However, the police did not believe their testimony and the questioning became increasingly tense. Both boys remained in custody. Josh's mother went to the police station to support him as much as she could, while Michael's father chose not to support him and did not appear. On the second day, Josh made a statement on video camera in the presence of his mother and several police at once. He explained that he was not sure what had happened, but that he had woken up in the middle of the night just before the fire and found his friend Michael missing. He also admitted that he was fed up with the situation. The police took this as a contradiction to Michael's statement, which meant that Michael was lying. Josh's statement essentially confirmed the police's suspicions of Michael's involvement in his mother's murder. On December 7, 1998, Michael was arrested for the murder of his mother, shocking both him and everyone who knew him. Michael believed that it was a misunderstanding and was confident that he would be proven innocent and released. He maintained his innocence, but this did not convince the police. Michael insisted that he would never harm his mother, whom he loved dearly. Although they had had some recent conflicts, he hoped to gain support from his uncle and aunt, who lived nearby. His uncle, a politician, along with his sisters, sided with him, believing that he could not have harmed his mother. They believed that the investigation should focus on their father Edward. However, Edward was cleared of the crime because he had an alibi. Many people noticed problems in the relationship between Michael and his mother. The family struggled after the divorce. Financial difficulties affected both mother and children, and Michael, a schoolboy, faced challenges during this difficult transition. The police became suspicious because of Michael's behavior, which was hardly exemplary. In 7th grade, he began skipping school frequently. Teachers were concerned that he might not advance to the next grade due to his behavioral problems. About 10 months before the tragic events, Michael's behavior became significantly worse, and witnesses reported that he had threatened Rita. This led to Michael being taken to a psychiatric clinic. However, doctors found no underlying problems and attributed his behavior to puberty and the stress of his parents' divorce. Michael later admitted that threatening his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. Unfortunately, he could no longer apologize or take back his words. Many troubled teens act in similar ways, but not all of them go astray. Michael was not a criminal. He did not associate with bad influences or get into trouble that would make him a potential suspect. Although he denied any wrongdoing, the police were still fully convinced that he was guilty. Years passed as Michael waited for his Supreme Court hearing. During this time, he was in prison and was deemed extremely dangerous, so he was not eligible for bail. Just before the trial started, the prosecutor offered Michael a plea deal for manslaughter. If he accepted, he could face a maximum of 15 years in prison, but he turned it down. Michael maintained his innocence, stating he should not be punished for a crime committed by someone else. He believed the only person capable of harming his mother so brutally was his father, Edward, but no one paid attention to his claims. In January 2002, Michael, who had just turned 17, appeared in court. The prosecutor presented evidence gathered during the investigation, including shoes that had traces of flammable substances used to burn the body. Tests confirmed that gasoline was the substance used. The prosecution argued that the young man had a tendency towards arson. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him play with fire and intentionally destroying objects for entertainment. A friend of the defendant stated that a few hours before Rita returned from work, they had used gasoline to ignite some trash on the railroad tracks. Upon inspecting the crime scene, police found a canister with a small amount of flammable liquid left inside. The defendant's lawyer explained that although gasoline had splashed on Michael's shoes while they were playing with fire, this did not prove he was responsible for the fire in the house. The defendant did not kill his mother or set fire to her body. From the prosecutor, the jury heard about Michael's behavioral issues and possible mental health concerns. However, these were not confirmed during assessments. Before his mother, Rita, died, the young man's threats to her were considered key evidence that he was involved in the murder. Michael's initial belief that he would not go to prison began to wane. The prosecution argued that Michael attempted to end his life about a month after the murder, citing guilt for harming a loved one. A fellow inmate claimed to have heard Michael confess, but he was never brought to the stand to testify. Michael's defense maintained his innocence, But as he downed and regained his composure, the jury began to suspect that he was hiding something. A key piece of evidence for the prosecution was a video of Josh's testimony from 3 years ago. Interestingly, Josh himself was not invited to take part in the case proceedings. From the start, Michael's defense seemed uncertain. It appeared they either lacked important information about their client or didn't believe he was innocent. The defense focused on the absence of direct evidence from the prosecution, which was actually true. No murder weapon or significant evidence was discovered. Additionally, there were no bloodstains or other traces on the Michael's clothing that suggested an attack had occurred. There were also no injuries that indicated he had struggled with the victim. The prosecution's hearings for the case lasted 3 days, after which the jury deliberated on the verdict. Initially, they struggled to reach a decision because the case was highly controversial. Eventually, they agreed that Michael was guilty of second-degree murder. Since he refused to cooperate with the prosecution, he received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Michael was stunned by the verdict. He accused the court of wrongful conviction and viewed himself as a victim, but he was sent to prison in Missouri regardless. No one paid attention to his claims anymore. This high-profile case drew the interest of several human rights activists who believed in Michael's innocence. However, over time, their interest in the case waned. The state correctional system is known for its extreme cruelty. From the moment he was imprisoned, Michael encountered the harsh realities of local prisons, which are among the most dangerous in the United States. On his very first day, he had a fight with his cellmate, Rome, and was sexually assaulted by prison staff. He realized that to survive in this environment, he had to adapt quickly, otherwise, he might not make it to his appeal hearing. Desperate to live freely again, he was determined to navigate this difficult phase of his life. He maintained that his conviction was due to a mistake. Despite feeling out of place in prison, Michael chose to alter his behavior by becoming more aggressive and getting multiple tattoos, as this was viewed positively by other inmates. This was his way of protecting himself. He repeatedly reached out to his father for help, but Edward did not support him. After 10 years of imprisonment, Michael's situation began to improve. During this time, he contacted the human rights organization Innocence, which advocates for the rights of those wrongfully convicted. The young man's case quickly drew the interest of several lawyers who thoroughly reviewed the case materials. They identified clear flaws in the investigation and the prosecutor's office. Human rights activists believed that Michael's inconsistent statements made after his mother's death were a result of his fragile mental state and the trauma he had endured. Furthermore, it was evident that he was still a minor at that time. Given that his mother's skull was severely damaged, it was unlikely that a 14-year-old boy had the physical capability to cause such an injury to an adult. It was also suspicious that Michael's friend Josh didn't hear any sounds of a fight, suggesting that it likely never happened. Rita lost consciousness after just one blow from someone much larger and older than a 14-year-old boy. Furthermore, the fire chief's belief that the body was burned with gasoline was questionable. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already been put out, and any fuel had been consumed. The prosecutor's case relied solely on the dog's reactions, which indicated the presence of something that could start a fire. However, it's clear that the dogs couldn't accurately identify what they detected. The defense attorneys sought to challenge the key piece of evidence against the teenager: traces of gasoline found on his shoes. They argued that the testing method used to examine the soles was based on chemical reagents, which they believed was not reliable enough. They claimed this method could misidentify traces of gasoline as coming from certain polymers used in shoe production. Eventually, even the state crime lab supported this argument, noting that solvents and adhesives used in Michael's sneakers had chemical compositions very similar to gasoline. However, this information was not commonly known in the 1990s. Additionally, there was a video recording of Josh's statements. he had multiple conversations with police officers both before and after his friend's conviction. He mentioned that when he was 15, he endured lengthy interrogations by police, which were very tiring. Josh clarified that waking up in the middle of the night did not necessarily mean that Michael was harming Rita at that time. It was possible that his friend simply went to the bathroom. Ultimately, Josh expressed uncertainty about whether he could have seen an empty bed in the dark, suggesting that Michael might have been lying underneath it. Josh initially maintained Michael's innocence. However, the police created a misleading story using conversations taken out of context. Recordings from the interrogation revealed that Josh believed Michael was guilty. Josh later recanted his initial statement, revealing that police had threatened him into a plea deal to avoid being incarcerated with Michael. As a result, Josh did not testify at trial. Instead, the prosecution presented a video and audio recording of his testimony that showed potential involvement, without bringing Josh to trial. Michael's attorneys argued that this was because Josh could have contradicted key evidence that the prosecution relied on. Had the defense attorney had the opportunity to speak to Josh, the outcome may have been different. Following the incident, the media focused on securing Michael's release from prison by gathering evidence that disproved the prosecution's allegations. Many people close to Rita believed that Michael's father, Edward, was the real killer. Edward had a strong motive for the crime. After their divorce, the court ordered him to pay a significant amount of alimony to his ex-wife, which severely affected his finances. Many people attested to Edward's poor character and the way he treated his wife. During the divorce proceedings, he openly threatened Rita, saying that she would not live long enough to receive alimony. However, when Edward Polite was questioned by police after the murder, he gave an alibi. He had been more than 100 kilometers away from his home during the time of the crime, and witnesses corroborated his testimony. Therefore, any suspicion against Edward was dismissed. From the beginning, Michael insisted that his father was the only one capable of planning Rita's murder, suspecting that Edward was working with others to commit the crime. This theory was further supported by his legal team. Attention turned to Edward's brother Johnny. Interviews were conducted with neighbors and Johnny's wife, who testified that he returned home around 6 a.m. on the day of the murder and then disappeared overnight without giving a clear reason for his absence. Neighbors also reported seeing his pickup truck near the Rita's home late that night. During the investigation, police discovered a crowbar among Johnny's belongings, which appeared to be the instrument used to inflict the fatal injuries on Rita. The crowbar was sent for examination and was tentatively identified as the murder weapon. Despite this evidence, the prosecution maintained that Michael was guilty. His attorneys filed an appeal. They brought all their supporting evidence to the appeal. Unfortunately, Missouri's judicial system is notoriously strict, making it difficult to overturn a verdict or reopen the case. From the start, the court imposed obstacles on Michael's legal team, leading to the dismissal of their appeal. As the legal battle continued, it seemed that Michael's lawyers were in trouble. Then, in 2021, something important happened. Missouri passed a new law that gave a second chance to juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes. Michael and his legal team quickly seized this opportunity, which played a key role in their case. On April 22, 2022, Michael's two sisters, Melanie and Crystal, brought the entire family to the rehabilitation center to welcome their younger brother, who had been paroled after 23 years. At age 38, as he walked out of prison, Michael looked up at the sky and expressed gratitude to his mother, recognizing her unwavering support for keeping him hopeful during his difficult years in prison. After his release, Michael wanted to ride a bike, a favorite hobby from his life before prison. He moved in with his sister because he had nowhere else to go and hoped to forget the decades he spent surrounded by criminals. To help with this, he started removing the tattoos that reminded him of his time in prison. Eventually, he found work as a carpenter and reconnected with his old friend Josh, who sincerely apologized for his part in what happened. Michael understood and assured Josh that he held no grudge against him. Josh expressed regret for not sleeping on the sofa that night. He believed that if the attacker had come in through the front door and seen Josh on the sofa, things might have turned out differently. Despite the new law allowing for conditional early release, the prosecutor could still initiate a new trial at any time for those who had been released. However, Michael recognized that there were significant gaps in the police evidence against him. The case against him relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be challenged. These accusations had a serious impact on his reputation, but he remained hopeful that the court would reconsider the case, especially since the real killer was still at large. The lawyers proceeded with caution to avoid harming Michael or provoking Missouri's justice system. Eventually, the local sheriff acknowledged the need to reopen the investigation into Michael's mother's murder. This renewed focus required police to re-examine a large amount of evidence that had been neglected for over 20 years. One key piece of evidence, the Rita's car, was also available for analysis. The prosecutor's office collaborated with the defense team, marking a significant turning point for Michael. He had been imprisoned for a murder he did not commit since he was just 14 years old. After spending 23 years behind bars, which represented most of his life, he longed to return to a normal life and felt he was finally on that path. However, he still needed to clear his name completely. Additionally, Michael was determined to find his mother's real killer, convinced that his father was responsible for setting him up. This betrayal had devastated his life while his father continued to live freely. The investigation into the crime was still active, and despite the obstacles presented by the local justice system, many law enforcement officials, including the prosecutor, supported Michael. With their backing, he felt confident that the true criminal would eventually be brought to justice. The investigation is ongoing, and there are indications of progress. However, even if justice is served, it won't bring back the lost decades for Michael. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Nancy DePriest. In February 1998, a visitor arrived at the office of the current governor of Texas. The visitor was a criminal who wanted to confess and cleanse his soul. He began writing letters to the police and the prosecutor's office, attempting to reach out to them for 2 years starting in 1996, but all his attempts were ignored. Eventually, he decided to write directly to the governor. In his letter, he confessed to a crime far more serious than robbery or rape. Over 4 pages, he detailed the murder of a girl named Nancy DePriest, which he had committed in 1988. He urged the governor to take his confession seriously, stating that he had become religious and wanted to confess. 2 men had already been imprisoned based on statements related to a crime they did not commit. Both were falsely accused and unjustly convicted. During the investigation, it came to light that 2 young men had admitted to the murder. While the true killer felt remorse for ruining their lives, he believed that the wrongful convictions were a result of police pressure, which he managed to evade. In 1998, this criminal wrote another letter to the prosecutor's office, confessing to the murder of a young girl and providing numerous details that only the actual murderer would know. The letter caught the attention of the governor, leading to the reopening of the case files to investigate the man's claims, as his conscience began to weigh heavily on him. Police started to re-examine all the case materials and discovered many inconsistencies. The story of the murder began in the year of 1988. On the morning of October 24th, around 9:30 a.m., the administrator arrived on Rent Street in Austin, Texas, to check on her employee, Nancy, who had not answered the phone. Nancy was a manager and was supposed to arrive early to prepare the food. Her husband drove her to the restaurant that day at 7:40 a.m. before going to work. According to the restaurant's schedule, Nancy's last contact with the owner was at 8:30 a.m., when she placed an order for ingredients that were running low. However, when the owner called Nancy at 9 a.m. to check if they were ready to open, Nancy did not answer. Her attempts to call back were met with silence. Worried, the owner decided to go to the restaurant, where she found the back door unlocked, water spilled on the floor, and the mixer running. Everything was eerily quiet, and Nancy was nowhere to be seen. The restaurant owner continued to search and found Nancy in the bathroom, surrounded by her own blood. Her head was severely injured, her eyes were glassy and unfocused. Fortunately, she was still alive, but her wrists were tied with her own bra. Panicked, the restaurant owner immediately called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived, found Nancy alive, and rushed her to the hospital, where doctors did everything they could to save her. Unfortunately, her injuries were too severe to save her. After discussing her condition with the doctors, Nancy's family made the heartbreaking decision to remove her life support. They chose to donate her organs, believing that Nancy would support this choice, ultimately helping to save the lives of many others. Forensic experts found that Nancy had been violently raped before she was shot in the back of the head. DNA evidence was collected from the crime scene and sent to the lab for analysis. The lead police believed that the motive for her murder was robbery, as the cash register from the day before was missing. A year earlier, multiple pizzerias in the Austin area had been robbed, but those incidents happened late at night or after closing hours, and there were no injuries, rapes, or murders. The thieves focused solely on stealing cash from the registers and the business's earnings. Nancy's murder was markedly different from previous robberies in the city. The police discovered multiple hair samples throughout the crime scene, including behind the counter and in the restroom. Her clothing was found in the sink of the women's restroom, indicating a struggle had occurred. The police considered three possible scenarios. First, Nancy might have forgotten to lock the front doors. Second, she could have known the perpetrator and willingly let him in. Third, he might have had access to the establishment and possessed his own key. Rumors about the murder of the pizza shop employee spread quickly throughout Austin, particularly affecting other Pizza Hut locations in the area. All employees were warned about the potential danger. This horrific incident shocked the community, from the victim's family to all Austin residents. Everyone was desperate to know who could harm Nancy, and the public urged the police to apprehend this perpetrator swiftly. Police investigated whether Nancy had any enemies. However, at just 20 years old, Nancy had no known connections to criminals and had never been in trouble with the law. She was a kind, well-liked person from Fort Worth, Texas, and well-known to the locals. No one expected her to be the victim of such violence. Just before the tragedy, Nancy had been married to Todd DePriest, who worked for the United States Air Force. At the time of her death in July 1987, the couple had a daughter, Sylvia. The employees at the restaurant where Nancy worked were stunned by her murder. They described her as a kind and friendly young woman who was happily married and deeply loved her family, including her husband and daughter. As a manager, Nancy was well respected by her colleagues, who viewed her more as a friend or sister. There were no complaints about her work ethic or leadership. Police first investigated the possibility that the attacker had a key to the restaurant. This led them to consider current and former employees, as all the pizza parlors in the chain had the same key system. This greatly expanded the pool of potential suspects. Police focused on the restaurant owner who discovered Nancy's body, but eventually discovered that everyone had an alibi and that there were no suspicious individuals among the employees. The main suspect initially considered was Nancy's husband Todd, but he had a solid alibi. After dropping Nancy off at work, he went directly to his own job, which ruled him out as a suspect. This left police puzzled about who could have attacked Nancy. Her family insisted she would never open the door to a stranger and always kept her doors locked, suggesting that the attacker was someone she knew. The police faced growing pressure from the local community, which was flooded with complaints and demands for a swift resolution. The public's fear heightened, particularly on November 9, 2 weeks after the incident, when the restaurant on Rhin Street reopened. Pizza Hut's management instructed employees to monitor customers closely and to report any suspicious behavior immediately. On the same day, restaurant employees contacted the police to report 2 suspicious individuals. It turned out that these men were Christopher Ochoa, 22, and Richard Danziger, 19, who were employees of Pizza Hut at different locations. The security guard noted that they arrived in a car, parked in the lot, sat in a vehicle for a while, and then came inside to order beer. The 2 young men barely spoke and seemed to be examining the pizzeria suspiciously. When the security guard approached them, he was disturbed by their comments about the murder of Nancy. Christopher and Richard asked if there were any suspects in the case and questioned why there was no security present during the incident. The security guard then asked Richard where he was at the time of the crime, and he replied that he had been working at a different Pizza Hut that morning. Richard believes that there are multiple people involved in the case. The 2 men then raise their beer bottles in a toast, which seems odd to the security guard. The security guard then informs his colleagues of this unusual behavior, prompting them to contact the police with their suspicions. The police quickly identify the young men and check their alibis, which are confirmed. They could not have been at the pizza parlor where Nancy worked that morning. The conversation between the young men and the security guard is also revealing. It is possible that the young men were simply afraid for their safety, as they worked at similar establishments, which prompted them to discuss their concerns with the security guard. However, Christopher and Richard were immediately considered the prime suspects. This was likely due to public pressure and the lack of other suspects for the police. They were well suited to the role of the criminals, as they were likely acquaintances of the girls. They also had keys to the restaurant and had a reputation as good people. They did well in college and worked in a pizza parlor to support themselves, so their loved ones refused to believe that they were involved in the murders. A police officer, Sergeant Hector Palenka, joined the investigation. Hector had actually solved all of his cases. However, there were rumors that he could be less than professional and abused his position. Some claimed that he was willing to use the most extreme measures to obtain confessions. According to rumors, Hector repeatedly beat suspects to obtain confessions. While talking to Hector, Richard revealed that he had heard from co-workers that Nancy was shot in the back of the head with a .2 pistol. He also mentioned that there was a girl's blue apron in the sink, which was blocking the drain and causing the restaurant to flood. Although this information spread quickly among the staff, the police officer found it highly significant. From that point on, the officer became convinced that Richard was the murderer. Hector thought that only the killer would know specific details, like the color of the apron, ignoring that all the staff wore the same uniform. However, aside from his suspicions, the police had no real evidence against Richard. Colleagues verified that Richard was working the morning of the murder, so he was soon released despite the suspicions against him. The police met Christopher at a pizza parlor in another part of town and then brought him to the station to discuss the case. Unlike the previous suspect, Christopher faced a much harsher situation. He was interrogated for hours using aggressive tactics. The officers attempted to intimidate him several times and warned him of the possibility of physical harm and the death penalty, which is legal in Texas. During the interrogation, Christopher cried and tried to prove his innocence, but this only seemed to strengthen the officers' resolve. Despite the intense pressure, the boy maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in the crime. The officers threatened to imprison Christopher with the most violent inmates at the Palenka institution, implying he would face sexual violence if he did not confess. In desperation, Christopher asked what he needed to do to avoid this fate. The police insisted that he admit guilt. Overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, Christopher falsely confessed that his friend Richard had committed murder. The police recorded his statement. Afterward, Christopher was not allowed to leave. He wanted to go home, but instead, he was taken to the hospital for hair, blood, and other sample collections. Then, he was informed that he couldn't be released because he had signed a statement against Richard and was at risk. Christopher was placed in a hotel and was not allowed to leave his room. The next day, he was brought back to the police station, where they stated that they were certain he was involved in Nancy's murder. He was not a witness, but an accomplice. The nightmare begins again. This time, the police demand a confession from Christopher. He is forced to confess on tape. He repeats the story against his friend, which he was beaten into lying about during the first interrogation. Now, the police force him to say that at the time of the attack, he was also near the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked and was waiting in his friend's car. Of course, they are talking about Richard, who allegedly raped the girl, shot her, and stole the money. Christopher is denied a lawyer during the second interrogation. He has not eaten, drank, or slept properly for days. However, even at this stage, they force him to take a lie detector test. He is forced to answer yes or no questions, not knowing that it is all a scam. As a result of this test, the police falsely accused him of failing a polygraph test in order to further threaten him. Next, the police asserted that they believed he was still in the pizzeria during the massacre and actively participated in the crime. They alleged that the reason for the polygraph test was to prove that Richard was the mastermind behind the crime and that Christopher was his accomplice. Despite the police's insistence on his guilt, Christopher maintained his innocence. They then proposed a deal. If he revealed the truth about what happened, he would serve 60 years in prison instead of facing the death penalty. Additionally, Christopher was promised that if he behaved well in prison, he could eventually be released early. However, if he refused to cooperate, he would face the death penalty. Christopher's answers were recorded on a tape recorder. The police focused on getting a statement that suited their needs. They asked Christopher suggestive questions, suggesting how he should answer. During this time, the recording paused. Then, Officer Hector gave Christopher the answer he wanted and the recording continued. This process took a long time, and the exhausted Christopher continued to resist, although weakly, because he was mentally and physically exhausted. The police became angry and threw a chair against the wall. Hector decided to repeat a tactic he had used just a few days earlier. At that time, Hector brought a typewriter and typed up the statement needed to close the case. Christopher simply signed it. After a few hours, Christopher was taken to the county jail. Over the past 24 hours, he had been interrogated for over 20 hours and spent a week in solitary confinement. In reality, he was being held against his will in a hotel room. Somehow, the purported confession made its way to the police. Although it was clearly false, Christopher signed it, allowing the court to use it as a full confession to Nancy's murder. The document claimed that at approximately 7 a.m., Richard and Christopher went to the Pizza Hut. They had a .22 caliber pistol and used a key to enter the restaurant without any trouble. They found Nancy inside alone, tied her up, and attacked her several times. She was then shot once in the back of the head. Before leaving, they turned on the water to flood the restaurant and destroy the evidence. The day after his forced confession, on November 15th, Richard was arrested while visiting relatives. He was charged with murder and faced the death penalty. After his arrest, the police informed him that they had solved a brutal crime, claiming that the public could now feel safe. Police Hector and others pressured Christopher to give a statement, claiming that they had enough evidence to proceed with the charges. However, the only evidence they actually had was Christopher's confession, which was obtained through torture and psychological pressure. On November 21st, Richard's lawyer, hired by his family, worked hard to argue that the police had illegally obtained a confession. Afterwards, the prosecution began discussing DNA tests, which they claimed matched samples found at the crime scene. The analysis indicated that Christopher could not be ruled out as a potential source of the biological materials found on the Nancy's body. However, the test results did not prove his involvement. It's important to note that the accuracy of DNA testing in the 1980s was much lower than it is today. This meant that expert opinions at the time could not effectively establish guilt. Despite this, the evidence was still presented in the case. Richard maintained his innocence and struggled to understand why his friend Christopher testified against him. The prosecution claimed that a hair found in the pizzeria matched Richard's hair. However, the investigation's findings were inconclusive. The analysis concluded that the material collected was not a follicle, which also indicated that the reliability of the test was very low. The phrasing used in the report was identical to that for Christopher. While Richard could still be considered a potential owner of the found materials, it couldn't be definitively stated that they belonged to him, especially given the low accuracy of the results. This data strengthened the prosecution's argument. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision relied heavily on how the prosecutor presented their case. The troubles for the young men do not end there. Christopher's family cannot afford a lawyer, so Christopher is assigned a public defender. Christopher asserts in his defense that his confession was obtained under intense moral pressure from the police, which he finds intolerable. Unfortunately, the lawyer chooses not to investigate this complaint. Instead of defending Christopher's rights, he claims that the only way to avoid the death penalty is to plead guilty. Christopher is asked to testify against Richard. Surprisingly, the lawyer shows little interest in defending Richard and quickly aligns with the prosecution. He is so certain of Richard's guilt that he opposes the investigation and questions the forensic evidence. In a discussion with Christoph, the defense even mentions a witness who claims to have seen Richard at the crime scene, adding to the list of false accusations. Furthermore, the attorney reported that Christopher's fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, so he threatened his client. In fact, the prosecutor's office did not find a gun at all. On April 6, 1989, Richard was charged with armed robbery and rape. For this crime, he could have faced a sentence of 5 to 99 years in prison. However, Christopher believed that the prosecution had shifted its focus and now considered Christopher the murderer, claiming that he had shot Nancy. In fact, the prosecution had enough evidence to convict Richard of murder. At his trial on May 5 of that year, Christopher followed his attorney's advice and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. His cooperation resulted in a life sentence, avoiding the death penalty. Richard's trial started on January 22, 1990, and it attracted significant public attention. The courtroom was filled to capacity, creating an intense atmosphere where attendees seemed eager for immediate justice against the defendants. They were brought to court wearing bulletproof vests due to concerns over potential violence. After hearing the testimonies, the jury deliberated for just 7 minutes before finding Richard guilty of rape and related charges, resulting in a life sentence. Nancy's family expressed satisfaction with the verdict. Over a year later, it was revealed that Richard was wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit. During this time, he had been the victim of a brutal attack, where he was severely beaten and suffered a serious head injury that required part of his brain to be removed. Although Richard survived, he was left disabled for life. At 22, he was moved to a specialized care facility where he received 24-hour assistance, as he was no longer able to care for himself. On that significant day, the leadership of the Austin police focused on Detective Hector Palanca. It became clear that he was abusing his powers systematically, as confirmed by other department employees. There was even video evidence of Hector torturing and physically abusing a suspect to force confessions. As a result, he was initially removed from his position. However, he was later reinstated and continued to harass both guilty and innocent individuals for many years. The damage caused by Hector to the law enforcement system is hard to comprehend. One case alone led to an innocent young man being sentenced to life in prison, while another victim was left permanently disabled. Shockingly, their cases remained unexamined until 1998. The Nancy DePriest case was long considered resolved, and no one had revisited it. This situation changed when Akeem Marina stepped in and sent a letter of confession to the governor, requesting that he reach out to the lawyers. Akeem's letter to the governor's office provided information that could help the police gather physical evidence. He claimed that the handcuffs and bag used in the attack could be found at his parents' home. In addition, the gun that shot Nancy had been confiscated during his arrest for other crimes. The police eventually took the letter seriously and began investigating the case. After reviewing the information, the police were able to confirm the criminal's claims. With more evidence in the archives, they approached Christopher, who was serving a sentence in prison. At first, Christopher was skeptical about the police visit and thought they might be trying to frame him for another crime. As a result, he chose to stick to the false story he had previously confessed to, a story influenced by Officer Hector, and did not provide any useful information. Eventually, Christopher discovered that the police wanted to talk to him because of a letter from Akeem, in which Akeem had confessed to the crime. This news gave Christopher hope that he could prove his innocence and possibly be released. However, he no longer had faith in the justice system. In June 1999, he contacted a project called Innocence. In his letter, he explained his situation, and when activists from the project contacted the police, the district attorney reviewed the case documents. In August 2000, DNA samples were taken from Akeem, whose conscience was tormenting him. Multiple tests were conducted, the results of which clearly showed that Akeem had indeed raped Nancy, and that Christopher and Richard had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. A ballistics test confirmed that the shot that killed Nancy had been fired from the gun confiscated from Akeem. This news shocked everyone, including Nancy's family. Officer Hector Palenka was fired from the police force and retired, and it was eventually decided that the case would be re-examined. On January 16, 2001, a Texas court overturned the convictions of Christopher and Richard, whose lives had been irreparably damaged. In court, Nancy's mother sat next to Christopher's mother, holding her hand. During the trial, Christopher admitted that under pressure from Hector Palenka, he broke down and confessed to a crime he did not commit, dragging his friend Richard into the lie. Akeem, the author of the letter, testified at trial. He claimed that he killed Nancy because he was driven to human sacrifice by voices in his head. He admitted to stealing a work uniform from another restaurant and wearing it the day he knocked on the door of the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked. Believing that he was a coworker from the same restaurant chain coming to her aid, she opened the door without fear, where he then pointed a gun at her. He demanded money and took her into the bathroom, where he raped and killed her. Akeem testified that during the attack, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the back of her head. According to his confession, he raped her 8 times before shooting her. During the trial, Akeem revealed that he had heard voices since childhood, but they completely disappeared when he converted to Christianity while in prison. He expressed a strong desire to atone for his sins and confessed to the crime. The prosecutor's office initially wanted him to face the death penalty but eventually asked for life in prison. The judge agreed, and Akeem received 3 life sentences. An investigation was then launched into the 3 police officers who questioned Christopher and Richard, but they faced no significant consequences. Christopher and Richard were eventually found not guilty, and their convictions were overturned, leading to their release. Their families were in disbelief. Christopher shared that he often cried at night in prison, unable to understand why he was there. Both men consistently claimed their innocence, yet no one believed them. The families of Christopher and Richard were furious about the unfair 12-year sentences, which had shattered their lives. Lawyers for the wrongfully convicted filed lawsuits, resulting in financial settlements. Richard received a total of $10.25 million, $9 million from the city, $1 million from the county, and $250,000 from the state. Christopher was awarded $5.3 million, and out of a sense of guilt, he donated $500,000 to Richard. Unfortunately, Richard's condition could not improve due to the traumatic brain injury he sustained. He required lifelong care and experienced mental health issues, along with partial recovery on the left side of his body. Richard spent his remaining days surrounded by loved ones who cared for him. He passed away from cancer in 2021 at the age of 50. Christopher was released after spending 12 years in prison. He pursued higher education and established a legal practice, offering many free consultations to those in need. Details about his personal life remain unknown. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jean Domenico. Jeanine Domenico was born on August 29, 1959, in Massachusetts, USA. After graduating from college in 1987, she moved to Shore, New Hampshire, where she married Anthony Kaczynski and started a family. They had 2 children, a daughter named Nicole and a son named Charlie, born 2 years apart. Unfortunately, after Charlie's birth, Jean's marriage began to deteriorate. Anthony became aggressive and abusive, which ultimately led to their divorce. After the divorce, Jean worked hard with Nicole, who had a developmental delay. Because of Jean's dedication, Nicole learned to manage her condition by the time she started school. However, after enrolling her children in school, Jean faced financial difficulties and wanted to work more. Fortunately, a neighbor helped care for the children. Despite her busy schedule, Jean prioritized her children and spent all her free time with them. When the children turned 14 and 12, Jean began working at an insurance agency about 20 minutes from home. With her heavy workload, she could no longer pick them up from school, but the teenagers were able to get home on their own, which helped them become more independent. In 2000, while working at an insurance company, Jean met Chris McVan. He was attracted to her professionalism and deep love for her children. They began dating and eventually became engaged, but Jean chose to postpone their wedding plans. She lived in a small house that was too small for the 3 of them, while Chris had a spacious house of his own. Although Chris was eager for them to move in together, Jean asked them to wait until her children were older, wanting to build her life with them without the added stress. Chris was very understanding and sometimes slept over, but he preferred to leave early in the morning to avoid having to queue for the bathroom. As Nicole's daughter turned 16, she entered a typical rebellious phase and started a relationship that Jean disapproved of. At the same time, Charlie began associating with a bad crowd, becoming hot-tempered and aggressive. It appeared that his transition into adulthood would be even more challenging than his sister's. Jean worried greatly while she was at work, leaving the children at home alone. She was particularly concerned because their biological father had been a domestic abuser who frequently resorted to violence, and Jean feared that her son might follow that same path. On August 6, 2003, the family's day started like any other. Chris woke up at 6 a.m., kissed Jean, and went to work, looking forward to dinner that evening. Jean finished work at 5 p.m. and went home, while Chris was still busy in a meeting. When Chris's meeting finally ended around 7 p.m., he called Jean to check in before they went out for dinner, but he was surprised when she didn't answer. He thought she might be out walking the dogs or busy getting ready. Before leaving the office, Chris noticed he had a missed call from his daughter Nicole, along with a long voicemail. In the message, Nicole sounded worried and frustrated because she had not been able to reach her mother or brother. She said she was going to be with her boyfriend William. The way she spoke was so chaotic that it was difficult for Chris to understand how serious the situation was. Chris decided to drive to Jean's house to talk things over. When he arrived, he quickly noticed Jean's car in the driveway, indicating she wasn't out walking the dogs, as they were barking in the backyard. Chris thought Jean should have been home for at least 2 hours and had enough time to finish her chores before dinner. However, the house was dark, and there was no sign of her. Concerned and not getting any response to his calls, Chris used his spare key to unlock the door. Once inside, he found the house eerily quiet, with the lights off as if the power had been cut. He called out for Jean as he moved through the dark rooms, but there was no reply. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he spotted Jean lying motionless on the kitchen floor. Chris feared she had passed out again due to her new strict diet, as she had fainted several times before from hunger. Worried she might have hit her head, he rushed over, shook her gently, and called her name, pleading for her to wake up, but she didn't respond. In the dark, Chris saw a puddle of blood beneath Jean. Panicking, he took out his mobile phone and called the rescue service. When the dispatcher answered, Chris's voice trembled, and he mumbled in confusion. He told the operator that he thought Jean had fainted due to her diet and had hit her head, which explained the blood. Without any light, he couldn't grasp how serious the situation truly was. As he waited for the police and medics, Chris sat in a chair, trying to calm down. He failed to notice the bloodstains scattered across the kitchen or the broken and disordered furniture around him. On the refrigerator, there was a note from his daughter. It explained that she wouldn't be joining the family for dinner because she was going out with her boyfriend. The note was signed William and Nicole, expressing their love and gratitude for Jean. Throughout the ordeal, Chris stayed in contact with the 911 dispatcher. However, due to his panic and shock, he struggled to follow the instructions and couldn't check for a pulse. While on hold waiting for the police, he still clung to the hope that Jean was alive. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and gently fixed her hair. He kissed her and whispered that he loved her. In that moment, he felt how cold she was and noticed her vacant, glassy eyes. Chris came to the painful realization that Jean was dead, but he couldn't accept it. The nearest police patrol was just minutes away from the Jean's home. When the officers arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. 43-year-old Jean lay in a pool of her own blood in the kitchen, having been brutally stabbed and beaten. It was clear her death was violent. Understandably, Chris, her lover, became the primary suspect. He was visibly shaking when the patrol arrived, struggling to speak after discovering her body. Karen Smith, a 29-year-old mother of 3 and a frequent babysitter for Jean, saw the disturbance in the yard and went to investigate. While Jean's fiancé was in shock and crying, the police spoke with the neighbor, hoping she might have heard or seen something during the attack. Unfortunately, she couldn't offer any useful information. The police cordoned off the area around the house, preventing local residents from entering the secured zone while they conducted their investigation. When local residents learned about the murder, they were heartbroken. The Jean was a kind and vibrant woman, making her death particularly shocking to those who knew her. Neighbors felt unsafe knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. At the crime scene, police uncovered evidence of a horrific attack involving multiple knives. One knife was found in the sink with a broken handle, while the blade lay on the floor near the victim's body, suggesting it broke during the assault. Another knife was discovered in the backyard, and a bloody palm print was found on the refrigerator. A trail of blood stretched from the kitchen to the living room, leaving even seasoned police officers stunned by the severity of the crime. Police noted that the killer appeared so angry that they did not care about the evidence they left behind. This type of behavior often indicates that the perpetrator had a personal connection to the victim and may have harbored a deep grudge against her. After a brief examination of the scene, the officers returned to Chris, who was still in shock and struggling to answer even basic questions. They watched Chris closely, as he was the prime suspect due to his unusual behavior and the circumstances surrounding him. Once Chris was able to speak with the officers, he shared his own suspicions. After realizing that Jean's death was not an accidental fall, he believed that only one person could be responsible. In his opinion, Jean's ex-husband, Anthony Kaczynski, was abusive and had a troubled relationship with her. The police recorded his statement and spoke to Jean's neighbors and relatives, who confirmed that Jean had indeed had problems with Anthony. She had previously mentioned being afraid of him. It was known that the teenager had a bad relationship with his mother. He felt angry with her because they had become estranged from his father and other issues. After hearing the conversation, Charlie believed that his father could not have harmed his mother, so he reported this belief to the police. He quickly called his father to clarify, and Anthony assured Charlie that he had nothing to do with the incident. Later, Anthony's alibi was verified. Chris said that Jean was so afraid that she wouldn't even keep knives in the house, fearing that her son Charlie might use them in future conflicts. In fact, Jean was so afraid of sharp objects that she refused to even keep them in the house. Before she started dating Chris, she had confided many times that she felt like she was about to die from cold weapons. Surprisingly, this strange obsession turned out to be a premonition. After Chris gave her a set of knives, Jean had a hard time agreeing to use them. At first, she locked the set in her bedroom when she went to sleep. Gradually, she got used to it and started using it recently. Before the tragedy, Nicole and Jean's arguments began. Nicole increasingly clashed with her mother, who still treated her like a child. One of the main obstacles was Nicole's relationship with her boyfriend. Jean was not sure Nicole was old enough to be with Nicole's 18-year-old bad boy, William. At the time of the massacre, they had been dating for over a year. They mostly communicated on the internet. Jean and her daughter disagreed on this issue. Nicole met William in May 2002 when she was 14 years old, and the guy was 17. They began to correspond, and their connection immediately strengthened. Despite the fact that the young man lived in Connecticut with his mother, the couple seriously intended to date and develop a relationship. The young man was born prematurely in 1985 into a dysfunctional family. Once, when he was still very young, his father quarreled with his wife and struck her hard in the face. Life in a cruel and indifferent family had a negative impact on the William. From a young age, he displayed aggressive behavior, frequently breaking things and often hurting his sisters. During this time, his father's inappropriate actions forced their mother, with 5 children to care for, to seek refuge in a motel. One tragic day, the family's house caught fire, and he watched helplessly as their belongings were consumed. He feared that his father was trapped inside. The sound of fire truck sirens haunted him for many years. His mother observed that after the fire, he changed significantly. William began to frequently discuss death, exaggerate his childhood experiences, and express a wish to die to her. As he grew older, William began to exhibit cruelty and aggression, often directed at strangers. When he was 8 years old, he experienced a devastating loss when 2 of his best friends died in a car accident. This trauma deeply affected him, leading to the development of psychological disorders that resulted in his admission to a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. During his treatment, he struggled with anger towards his mother, which he expressed during phone calls. While at the psychiatric clinic, William was prescribed medication to help manage his aggression, but this had a negative impact on him. He became reliant on these drugs to control his behavior. His mother believed that repeated hospital stays were the only solution to his mental health issues. However, doctors were unable to provide a clear diagnosis, rendering their efforts largely ineffective. Starting at the age of 9, William's problems intensified. In 1994, he attacked one of his sisters with a baseball bat and damaged various items in the house. This led to another hospitalization, and similar incidents occurred 2 more times. Throughout these admissions, doctors tried to understand what disorders he was facing. Another significant episode happened when he was 13, during which he frequently ran away from school and initiated fights. The longest duration he spent in a psychiatric clinic was an entire year. After that, William continued to attack his sisters and mother, often using his favorite weapon, a baseball bat. Following a lengthy treatment at the clinic, he was prescribed a new medication aimed at stabilizing patients with schizophrenia. From that point on, William's behavior became noticeably more manageable, bringing relief to his mother and sisters. However, in 2001, about a year before he met Nicole online, he had another outburst of anger. He threatened to harm himself, prompting his mother to call the police. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital again, where he stayed for about a month. When William started dating, he and his girlfriend began to communicate regularly through the internet and phone calls. This long-distance relationship turned out to be quite expensive, with Jean quickly noticing the high costs. Their frequent calls resulted in bills of $500 and even $1,000. The age difference and William's behavior became major concerns for Jean, who was already worried about the relationship. Jean was concerned about her daughter's future and the potential risks of her relationship with an older man. Meanwhile, William was charming Nicole with compliments and showing sensitivity, which easily swayed the inexperienced schoolgirl. Jean suspected that William was intentionally trying to make Nicole fall in love with him in order to push for a more intimate relationship. Jean recognized that this kind of behavior often comes from manipulators, and she feared her daughter might become a victim of someone like him from the internet. As a result, she tried to slow down the progression of their relationship. When Jean began to receive large phone bills, she banned Nicole from using the phone. This decision upset Nicole and led to an argument. In response, William wrote to Jean, expressing his admiration for her and thanking her for raising such a wonderful daughter. He asked her permission to continue seeing Nicole, saying that he was serious about their relationship. They had plans to move in together and start a family, and they both wanted to find jobs. However, instead of feeling happy about this, Jean was filled with fear. She felt that William was dangerous. Nicole convinced her mother to take her to Connecticut to meet William in person. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to end their relationship, believing that seeing the bad guy in person would turn Nicole off. She planned an 8-hour trip with Nicole. Unfortunately, her plan backfired. After the meeting, Nicole fell even more in love with William and ignored her mother's warnings about him. Nicole cried for 2 hours on the way home over the breakup, leaving Jean shocked at her daughter's immaturity. Nicole pleaded to transfer to a school in Connecticut so she could be near William. But Jean made it clear that until Nicole turned 18, she would live with her mother and younger brother. This became a source of tension in their relationship for the next 15 months. William got a job at McDonald's, helping his family financially while also trying to win over Nicole's mother. Meanwhile, Nicole struggled to live with her mother and brother, away from her boyfriend. Nicole and William both write letters to Jean, but their attempts seem childish and unconvincing. Jean remains adamant that Nicole must stay with her until she is an adult. William got his driver's license and saved enough money to buy a car, which made him excited to visit Nicole. In August 2003, he fulfilled his dream and went to see her. Nicole's mother hesitantly allowed him to stay for just a week so they could spend time together. Because Jean worked long hours, she let William stay at her home when she wasn't there. Their neighbor, Karen, occasionally checked on them throughout the day, claiming she was protecting them from getting too close. This, of course, was naive. One day, Nicole asked Karen to buy a pregnancy test, revealing that she and William had grown intimate. Karen was shocked and intended to tell Jean about it, but she never got the chance. Tragically, Jean was found dead in her home. The forensic expert concluded that she had been brutally beaten with a baseball bat. The evidence, including her injuries and the disarray in the house, indicated a prolonged struggle. In addition to numerous blunt object injuries, 53 stab wounds were found on Jean's body, especially on her arms, suggesting that these were defensive wounds during an attack. The most severely injured areas of the Jean were her head, face, neck, and upper chest. The attacker intended to kill her. Forensic analysis revealed 28 stab wounds concentrated in the neck, face, and upper body, indicating the seriousness of the injuries. The forensic expert noted that the Jean suffered for a prolonged period. Despite multiple injuries, only one stab wound to her arm struck a vital area, rendering her unable to move or call for help. This ultimately led to her losing consciousness and dying during the assault. The attacker also punctured her lung, causing her to suffocate as it filled with blood. When Chris learned of the severity of the attack, he was devastated. At that point, he regained consciousness and was willing to cooperate with the police. He provided a DNA sample. Chris went on to blame Jean's ex-husband, Anthony, for the attack, saying that Jean had expressed fear of Anthony, claiming that he had threatened to kill her. In the evening, Nicole and William returned to the house but were stopped by the police cordon and not allowed onto the property. The officers were initially unsure of their identities. Once they recognized the young couple, the police detained them and took them to the station for questioning. William appeared very anxious and restless, explaining that his anxiety stemmed from mental health issues. His mood fluctuated rapidly. At times he was friendly and willing to talk, while at other moments he became aggressive and withdrawn. This erratic behavior raised the officers' suspicions. Nicole and William were interrogated separately. William stated that he last contacted Jean around 2 p.m. He mentioned that they had walked together in the supermarket and planned a family dinner with Jean and Chris that evening before he was supposed to return to Connecticut. He claimed he knew nothing about the attack. In contrast, Nicole began crying immediately, making it hard to understand her. She became even more distressed when she learned about her mother's death. After a while, she calmed down enough to explain that they had spent the day in the supermarket. However, her account had significant inconsistencies compared to William's, which led police to suspect that he was not being truthful. As a result, they requested DNA samples for analysis. The main issue was Nicole's story about buying a shirt that William claimed to have worn all day, but it was missing when he was arrested. He also couldn't explain the whereabouts of the new shirt, which raised suspicions. This was odd, unless he got rid of it because it was stained with blood. When the police noticed this detail, William became visibly more nervous as they asked him probing questions. Eventually, he grew aggressive and refused to talk, citing his mental health problems. The police then asked when he last took his medication. At first, he said he hadn't taken his last dose due to being held and questioned, but later he changed his story and admitted he had not taken his pills for several days. The young couple seemed to be hiding something and began to feel pressured. Nicole tearfully shares her problems with her mother, while William confesses that he has many burdens on his conscience that he feels he cannot reveal. They reveal that William has been planning to take Nicole with him when he leaves home, a plan that Jean is strongly against. William constantly pressures Nicole. This manipulation makes her feel responsible for their troubles, and she often blames her mother for forbidding them. Eventually, the couple managed to escape from the police station, but they were caught again 2 days later. This time, Nicole and William confessed to killing Jean and were questioned separately. At first, William joked about her death, but it quickly became clear he was serious. He suggested they mix prescription drugs into Jean's morning coffee, thinking she would either overdose or fall asleep while driving, leading to a fatal accident. Unfortunately for them, their plan did not succeed. William came up with a new plan. He decided to add bleach to the cream that Jean used in her coffee. However, Jean noticed the strong smell and refused to drink it, which led them to think of more extreme measures. They considered setting Jean on fire in a car, but William's childhood fear of flames made that plan unfeasible. They then thought about blowing up the house with her inside, but that plan also didn't work out. Ultimately, William chose to confront Jean with a baseball bat, a weapon he had favored since he was a child. Initially, Nicole opposed this violent idea, but after some consideration, she changed her mind and agreed. On the day of the attack, William waited at home with the electricity turned off. Meanwhile, Nicole stayed in a car parked at a nearby store, making sure Chris wouldn't come back. When Jean entered the house, an argument broke out between her and William. In a sudden moment of escalation, he grabbed the baseball bat, marking it as the point of no return. The confrontation quickly turned violent as he swung the bat. Despite Jean's efforts to defend herself, he continued to strike her. Then, he picked up a larger knife and inflicted even more injuries. When police asked William how many times he stabbed Jean, he said it was about 8, but that was a significant understatement. In reality, he inflicted 53 stab wounds on her. After the brutal incident, William tried to clean up the house before going back to the car where Nicole was waiting, visibly shaken. He urged Nicole to go home and get him a towel to clean up the blood, and she agreed. Nicole entered the house, unfortunately stepping over her mother's body. She left a note on the refrigerator, took a towel and a knife she found, but then discarded both items before going to get William a change of clothes. The police collected evidence at the crime scene, including bloody handprints on clothes and shoes. William and Nicole were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. From the start, William's lawyer highlighted his mental health issues. However, according to the prosecutor's office, William was aware of his actions during the attack and had meticulously planned the crime. Nicole convinced the prosecution to accept a deal. As part of this agreement, she later testified against William, resulting in her receiving a prison sentence. However, she could reduce her sentence by 5 years if she completed an educational program while incarcerated. In 2005, William's trial began. Nicole claimed her actions were motivated by innocence and love, but she had played a role in the tragedy of her mother's death. The defense highlighted William's family problems. It was known that his mother drank heavily during her pregnancy, which may have contributed to his premature birth and many of his developmental challenges. The prosecution argued that Nicole had incited him to kill his mother. Nicole was aware that her boyfriend struggled with anger management. According to the defense, she exploited William for her own gain. William argued that he should be placed in a mental hospital instead of prison. However, the trial did not support this request. The jury found William Sullivan guilty and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.